My name is Daniel, and today I'm going to tell you about the night I stood in my empty apartment, staring at an eviction notice, convinced I was about to lose everything, and how God spoke words that would teach me the difference between what I could lose and what I could never lose if I trusted Him. Before we continue, if this story resonates with you, please subscribe to this channel and share it with someone who's afraid of losing what they have. Leave a comment telling me what you're afraid of losing right now. I read every single one, and I pray for each of you. I was 31 years old, sitting on the floor of my studio apartment at 11 p.m. on a Thursday, holding a piece of paper that felt like a death sentence. Final notice. You have 72 hours to pay $4,200 in past due rent or vacate the premises. $4,200. 3 months of rent I didn't have. 72 hours until I'd be homeless. I'd been a financial analyst at Meridian Investment Group for 6 years. Good salary, steady income, climbing the corporate ladder. 6 months ago, everything had seemed stable. Then the company restructured. My entire department was eliminated. 47 people, including me, let go in a single afternoon. They'd given us severance packages. Mine lasted 3 months. I'd been confident I'd find something new before the money ran out. I had experience, good references, a solid resume. But 3 months became 4, then 5, and now I was at 6 months unemployed with my savings completely depleted. I'd sent out 234 applications. I'd had maybe 20 interviews. I'd made it to final rounds 3 times, only to be told they'd gone with someone else. Each rejection felt like another door slamming in my face, another confirmation that I was failing, that I wasn't good enough, that everything was slipping away. The apartment was already mostly empty. I'd sold my furniture over the past 2 months. The couch, the dining table, the bed frame, the TV, anything that had value. I was sleeping on a mattress on the floor, eating ramen and whatever I could afford from the dollar store. Avoiding friends because I was too ashamed to admit how bad things had gotten. My phone buzzed, a text from my younger brother, Alex. "Hey, haven't heard from you in a while. Everything okay?" I stared at the message, trying to decide whether to lie or be honest. Alex was doing well, married, good job as a software engineer, just bought a house. The last time we'd talked, he'd been excited about some promotion he'd gotten. How could I tell him I was about to be homeless? I typed back, "Yeah, all good. Just busy with job search stuff." Another lie. I'd been telling so many lies lately, to my family, to friends, to anyone who asked how I was doing. Because admitting the truth, that I was failing, that I couldn't support myself, that everything was falling apart, felt like too much. The eviction notice sat on the floor in front of me, impossible to ignore. 72 hours. 3 days to come up with money I didn't have. 3 days until I'd be out on the street with nowhere to go. I thought about my options, running through scenarios I'd already run through 1,000 times. Ask my parents for money. They were retired, living on fixed income. They'd help if I asked, but it would drain their savings, and I still wouldn't have a job. I'd just be postponing the inevitable while burdening them. Ask Alex? He had the money, probably. But the thought of asking my younger brother to bail me out felt humiliating. I was supposed to be the responsible older brother, the one who had his life together, get a loan. My credit was already trashed from maxed-out cards and missed payments. No bank would give me anything. Find a roommate situation? Maybe, but that would take time I didn't have. And I'd need money for first month's rent and deposit somewhere new. Get any job, even minimum wage. I'd been applying to retail stores, restaurants, anything, but even those jobs weren't calling back. Apparently being overqualified made you unemployable everywhere. Every option led to the same conclusion. I was going to lose this apartment. I was going to lose my independence. I was probably going to end up back in my parents' basement at 31 years old. A complete failure. And it wasn't just the apartment. Over the past 6 months, I'd watched everything I'd built slip away. My savings gone, my furniture sold, my career momentum destroyed, my confidence shattered. My sense of identity as someone who had his life together evaporated. I'd lost my girlfriend too. Amanda and I had been together for 2 years. When I first lost my job, she'd been supportive. "You'll find something soon," she'd said. "This is just temporary." But as the months dragged on and I became more stressed, more withdrawn, more depressed, she'd gotten frustrated. 3 months ago, she'd sat me down and said, "Daniel, I can't do this anymore. I feel like I'm in a relationship with your unemployment, not with you. You're so consumed by this that there's nothing left of us." She'd been right. I had been consumed. Every waking moment spent on job applications, interview prep, anxiety about money. No energy left for the relationship, no capacity to be present with her. I'd been drowning and I'd pushed her away in the process, so I'd lost her too, lost the future we'd been planning, lost the person who'd known me best. Sitting on the floor of my empty apartment, staring at the eviction notice, I felt the crushing weight of it all. The loss, the failure, the fear, the absolute certainty that I was about to lose everything and I was powerless to stop it. I wasn't a religious person. I'd grown up going to church with my grandmother when I visited her, but it had never really stuck. God had always seemed like a distant concept, something other people believed in, but that didn't have much relevance to my actual life. I'd built my security on things I could control, my career, my income, my careful planning and responsible decisions, and all of it had crumbled anyway. But sitting there in the darkness of my apartment, with no options left and no strength to keep pretending I could handle this on my own, I did something I hadn't done since I was a kid. I prayed. It wasn't eloquent, it wasn't theological, it was just desperate honesty. God, I don't know if you're real, I don't know if you're listening, but I'm about to lose everything. My apartment, my savings, my career, my dignity, it's all gone or going, and I don't know what to do. I've tried everything I can think of and nothing is working. If you're there, if you care, I need help. Please, I can't do this anymore. I waited in the silence, half expecting nothing, half hoping for, what, a miracle? A voice from heaven, a sudden solution to materialize? But then, in the quiet of that empty apartment, I felt something. Not a voice I could hear with my ears, not words spoken aloud, but something deeper than sound, more fundamental than language, a presence, a knowing, a weight that felt different from the crushing weight of fear. This felt like substance, like something solid in the midst of chaos. And with that presence came words, not audible, but received, understood in a way that bypassed my rational mind. "You will not lose anything if you trust in me." I froze, barely breathing. What did that mean? I was actively losing everything. The eviction notice was right there. The empty apartment proved I'd already lost so much. How could I not lose anything? But the words had been so clear, so definite. "You will not lose anything if you trust in me." Not, "You won't lose your apartment if you trust me." Not, "Everything will work out exactly how you want if you trust me." But something deeper. "You will not lose anything if you trust in me." I sat with those words, trying to understand, trying to grasp what they meant when my circumstances screamed the opposite. When everything I could see and touch and measure said I was losing everything. Maybe it meant, what? That the things I was afraid of losing weren't actually what mattered? That there was something I couldn't lose, even if I lost everything else? That God was offering a different kind of security than the one I'd been building my life on? I didn't have answers, but for the first time in 6 months, I felt something other than crushing despair. There was a small flicker of something. Not quite hope, not quite peace, but possibility. The possibility that maybe there was more to the story than what I could see. That maybe losing everything I'd been clinging to wasn't the end. I picked up the eviction notice, looking at it with different eyes. 72 hours. It was still real. The threat was still there, but something had shifted, not in my circumstances, those were still terrible, but in something deeper. In the place where I'd been carrying the weight alone, there was now a sense that maybe I wasn't alone. "You will not lose anything if you trust in me." I didn't know what would happen in 72 hours. I didn't know where I'd live or how I'd survive. But I knew one thing. I'd reached the end of trusting in myself, in my plans, in my ability to control outcomes. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly where I needed to be to discover what it meant to trust in something bigger than myself. I went to bed that night on my mattress on the floor in my empty apartment with an eviction notice and no solutions. But for the first time in 6 months, I slept. Not peacefully, not without worry, but I slept. Because in the midst of losing everything, I'd heard something that suggested there might be something I couldn't lose, something that didn't depend on my job or my apartment or my bank account, something that was offered freely if I was willing to trust. I didn't understand it yet. Didn't know how to trust when everything was falling apart. Didn't know what it would look like to not lose anything when I was clearly losing everything. But I'd heard the words, and they'd been spoken with such certainty, such authority, such peace, that I couldn't dismiss them. You will not lose anything if you trust in me. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. The eviction notice wouldn't disappear. Money wouldn't materialize. But tomorrow, I'd wake up having heard something that changed the equation, that suggested there was more happening than what I could see. That offered a different foundation than the one I'd been standing on. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to take the next step. I woke up Friday morning with the eviction notice still on the floor beside my mattress. 60 hours left. Less than 3 days to figure out what to do with my life. The logical part of my brain immediately started its familiar routine. Calculate how much cash you have, review potential options, panic about the impossibility of the situation. But underneath that noise was something new, an echo of those words from last night. You will not lose anything if you trust in me. I still didn't understand what they meant, but they'd been spoken with such certainty that I couldn't shake them. I made instant coffee, the cheap kind I'd been buying because it was all I could afford, and sat on the floor with my laptop. I had $17 in my checking account. My credit cards were maxed out. I had no assets left to sell except my laptop and phone, which I needed for job hunting. But instead of immediately diving into job applications like I'd been doing every morning for 6 months, I did something different. I opened Google and searched, what does it mean to trust God? The results were overwhelming. Bible verses, articles, sermons, testimonies. I clicked on a few, skimming through concepts that felt both foreign and strangely familiar. Faith, surrender, dependence, trust as an action, not just a feeling. One article stuck with me. It was titled, "Trusting God doesn't mean your circumstances change, it means you change." The author wrote about losing his business, his home, going through bankruptcy. But through it all, learning that God was more interested in transforming him than in preserving his comfort. I read one particular paragraph 3 times. We think trust means God will give us what we want. But trust actually means believing God knows what we need. We think trust means avoiding loss, but trust means discovering that our identity and security don't depend on what we can lose. Everything in this world is temporary. But what God gives, His presence, His peace, His purpose that can't be taken away. The words resonated with something deep inside me. For 6 months, I'd been fighting desperately to hold on to what I was losing, my career identity, my financial security, my independence, my image of myself as someone who had it together. And the harder I fought, the more I lost anyway. What if the problem wasn't the loss itself? What if the problem was that I'd built my entire sense of self on things that could be taken away? My phone rang. Unknown number. Normally I didn't answer those, usually spam or debt collectors, but something made me pick up. Is this Daniel Martinez? Yes. Hi, Daniel. This is Rebecca Chen from Apex Consulting Group. We received your application for the senior analyst position. Are you still interested and available for a phone interview today? My heart started racing. Apex was a good company. The position paid well. This could be the break I needed. Yes, absolutely. I'm available. Great. Can you talk now? I have about 30 minutes. Yes, now is perfect. The interview lasted 45 minutes. Rebecca asked about my experience, my approach to financial analysis, my familiarity with their industry. I answered as well as I could, trying to project confidence while sitting on the floor of my empty apartment, very aware that I was 72 hours from being evicted. "Your background is impressive," Rebecca said at the end. "We're moving quickly on this position. If we want to move forward with an in-person interview, would you be available Monday?" "Yes, definitely." "Perfect. We'll be in touch by end of day. Thank you for your time, Daniel." After we hung up, I sat there processing. A real interview, a real possibility. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was how God was going to work things out. Maybe the words last night meant that this job would come through. I'd get the money. I'd save the apartment. But even as I thought that, I remembered, "You will not lose anything if you trust in me." Not, "You won't lose the apartment." Not, "You'll get this job." Just, "Trust me, and you won't lose anything that matters." The distinction felt important, though I wasn't sure why. I spent the rest of the morning doing something I hadn't done in years, searching for information about faith, not in an academic way, but in a desperate, seeking way. I found a church website for a place called Grace Community Church, about 15 minutes from my apartment. They had a service Sunday morning. I bookmarked it. At noon, my phone rang again. My mom. I almost didn't answer. I'd been avoiding my parents' calls for weeks, giving them brief updates that everything was fine, deflecting their concern. But something made me pick up. "Daniel, hi honey, how are you?" Just those simple words. Her voice, the genuine care in it, broke something open in me, and before I could stop myself, I was telling her the truth. "Mom, I'm not okay. I'm really not okay. What's wrong? What happened? I'm about to be evicted. I have 3 days to come up with over $4,000 or I'm out. I've been unemployed for 6 months. I've sold everything. I'm completely broke, and I don't know what to do." There was a pause. Then, "Oh, Daniel, why didn't you tell us? We could have helped. We can help. I didn't want to burden you. You and Dad are retired. You shouldn't have to bail out your 31-year-old son. Daniel, listen to me. You're our son. You will never be a burden to us. Never. Do you understand?" I felt tears threatening. "I've failed at everything, Mom. I lost my job. I lost Amanda. I'm losing my apartment. I'm a complete disaster." "You haven't failed. You've hit a hard season. That's different. And you're not facing it alone, even if you've been trying to. Your father and I can help with the rent. Not all of it. We don't have $4,200 sitting around, but we can give you $2,000, and you can come stay with us while you figure things out. The guest room is always available. Mom, I can't take your money, and I can't move back home at 31. Why not? Pride. Daniel, pride is a luxury you can't afford right now. There's no shame in accepting help when you need it, and there's definitely no shame in coming home. This is what family does. We support each other through the hard times." We talked for another hour. She asked about the job search, about what I'd been eating, about how I was really doing mentally and emotionally. I was honest with her in a way I hadn't been in months, about the depression, the shame, the fear, the isolation. "I think you should talk to someone," she said gently. "A counselor or therapist. You've been carrying this alone for too long. It's affecting you." "I can't afford therapy, Mom." "Many therapists work on sliding scales. Some churches offer counseling. There are options. But Daniel, you need support beyond just financial help. You need help processing what you're going through." After we hung up, I felt simultaneously relieved and more vulnerable than I'd felt in years. I'd admitted the truth. I'd accepted help. I'd stopped pretending I had it all together. And somehow, that felt like trust. Not trust that everything would work out exactly how I wanted, but trust that I didn't have to carry this alone. Trust that asking for help wasn't weakness, but wisdom. Friday afternoon, I got an email from Apex Consulting. They wanted me to come in Monday at 10 a.m. for an in-person interview with the team. It was real. It was happening. I called my mom back. "I have an interview Monday. A really good one. If I get this job, I can pay you back quickly, within a month or two. We're not worried about being paid back, honey, but we're thrilled about the interview. I'll be praying for you." That evening, I did something else I hadn't done in years. I prayed again. Not just a desperate cry for help, but an actual conversation. "God, I don't really know how to do this. I'm not sure I even believe you're real, or if you are, that you care about someone like me. But last night you spoke to me. You said I wouldn't lose anything if I trusted you, and I want to trust, but I don't know how. I don't know what that looks like." I paused, feeling awkward talking to someone I couldn't see, but I continued. "I have an interview Monday. A real shot at a job that could fix everything financially, and I want it so badly, but I'm trying to understand what you meant about not losing anything, because from where I'm sitting, I've lost almost everything. My job, my savings, my girlfriend, my apartment, my dignity. What's left to not lose?" I sat in the silence, waiting, not sure if I expected an answer. But then, in my mind, came a thought that felt different from my usual thoughts. Gentler, more certain. What you've lost were things you needed to lose. What you're gaining is something you can't lose. The thought startled me. Things I needed to lose? My job? My savings? My sense of self-sufficiency? How could losing those things be something I needed? But even as I questioned it, something in me recognized truth. My identity had been completely wrapped up in my career, my financial success, my appearance of having life figured out. And when those things were stripped away, what was left? Who was I without the job title, the salary, the impressive resume? I didn't know. And maybe that was the point. Maybe I needed to not know so I could discover something else. Something that couldn't be taken away by a corporate restructuring or an eviction notice. Saturday morning, I did something I'd been avoiding for weeks. I called Alex. "Daniel, man, it's good to hear from you. What's going on?" I took a breath. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to just listen, okay?" "Okay, what's up?" I told him everything. The job loss, the financial spiral, the eviction, the desperate situation, and his response surprised me. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? I've been texting you for months, and you kept saying everything was fine." I was ashamed. "You're doing so well. I'm supposed to be the older brother who has it together, not the failure who needs help." "Daniel, that's ridiculous." "You're not a failure. You got laid off in a restructuring. That's not your fault, and you're my brother. I don't care about appearances or who's supposed to have what together. I care about you." He paused. "Look, I can't give you $4,000, but I can give you 1,000, and you can stay with Sarah and me until you get back on your feet. The guest room's empty. You're welcome here for as long as you need." "Alex, I can't." "Yes, you can, and you will, because that's what family does, okay?" By Saturday afternoon, I'd accepted help from 3 people: my parents, my brother, and my former colleague Mark, who I'd finally been honest with about my situation and who offered to connect me with a staffing agency he knew. 3 people who responded to my vulnerability, not with judgment, but with support. And I realized something. The thing I'd been most afraid of losing, my image, my pride, my appearance of independence, those were the things I'd needed to lose, because they'd been keeping me isolated, preventing me from receiving help, blocking connection with people who actually cared about me. "You will not lose anything if you trust in me." Sunday morning, I woke up with 56 hours left until eviction. But now, I had a plan. My parents' 2,000, Alex's 1,000, and I talked to my landlord and negotiated to pay the remaining 1,200 over the next 2 months if I could pay 3,000 now. He'd agreed, reluctantly. I wasn't going to be homeless, at least not immediately. I went to Grace Community Church that morning. It was bigger than I expected. Maybe 500 people in the sanctuary. I slipped into a seat near the back, feeling conspicuous and out of place. The pastor, a man probably in his 50s, spoke about a passage in the Bible I vaguely remembered from childhood, Jesus telling his followers not to worry about tomorrow, that God cares for them more than he cares for birds or flowers. We spend so much energy trying to secure our own futures, the pastor said, trying to control outcomes, prevent loss, protect what we have. But Jesus is saying, what if you trusted that you're already taken care of? Not that life won't be hard, it will be. Not that you won't face loss, you will. But that in the midst of it all, you're held by someone who loves you and has a purpose for your life that goes beyond your circumstances. The words landed on me with weight. That was it. That was what God had been trying to tell me Thursday night. Not that I wouldn't face loss, but that in the midst of loss, there was something I couldn't lose if I trusted Him. After the service, as people were mingling over coffee, a man about my age approached me. "Hey, I'm Chris. Haven't seen you here before. First time." "Yeah, I'm Daniel. What brought you in today?" I hesitated, then decided to risk honesty. "I'm going through a really hard time. Lost my job, about to lose my apartment. And a few nights ago I prayed for the first time in years, and I felt like God spoke to me, so I came here to, I don't know, figure out what that means, I guess." Chris smiled. "I get that. I was in a similar place 3 years ago. Bankruptcy, divorce, rock bottom. And that's when I found this church. Best thing that ever happened to me, honestly. Not because everything suddenly got easy. It didn't. But because I finally stopped trying to carry it all alone. We talked for 20 minutes. He gave me his number, invited me to a men's group that met Wednesday evenings, offered to grab coffee sometime. Simple kindness from a stranger who understood struggle. As I drove home, I thought about the past 3 days. I'd gone from complete despair to having options, from isolated and ashamed to connected and supported, from trying to control everything to accepting help. I still didn't have a job. I still didn't have financial security. I still didn't know what my future looked like, but I had something I hadn't had Thursday night, hope and people, and a growing sense that maybe God was real and maybe He actually cared. "You will not lose anything if you trust in me." I was starting to understand. What I couldn't lose was infinitely more valuable than what I could lose. And trust wasn't about ensuring good outcomes. It was about believing I was held by someone bigger than my circumstances. Tomorrow, I had an interview. Maybe I'd get the job. Maybe I wouldn't. But either way, I wasn't facing it alone anymore, and that changed everything. Monday morning, I woke up at 6 a.m. for my 10 o'clock interview with Apex Consulting. I'd borrowed a suit from Alex. Mine had been sold months ago along with everything else. It fit reasonably well, though the pants were a bit long. I looked in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the person staring back. Not because of the suit, but because something in my face had changed. The desperate, haunted look I'd been wearing for months had softened slightly. There was still stress, still uncertainty, but underneath it was something new, something that looked almost like peace. "You will not lose anything if you trust in me." I repeated the words as I got ready, as I drove to Apex's downtown office, as I sat in the lobby waiting to be called back. They'd become a sort of anchor, something to return to when the fear tried to take over. The interview lasted 2 hours. I met with Rebecca, then with the team lead Michael, then with 3 senior analysts I'd potentially be working with. They asked technical questions about financial modeling, scenario analysis, industry trends. They asked behavioral questions about how I handled pressure, conflict, challenging projects. I answered honestly. About my experience at Meridian, about specific projects I'd led, about challenges I'd navigated. And when Michael asked about the gap in my employment, I didn't lie or deflect. I was let go 6 months ago when my department was eliminated. It's been a difficult season, longer than I expected to be job searching, but it's also taught me things I wouldn't have learned otherwise. About resilience, about asking for help, about what really matters. Michael nodded. "Appreciate the honesty. We've all been through tough times. The question isn't whether you've faced setbacks, it's how you respond to them." After the final interview, Rebecca walked me to the elevator. "You did really well today, Daniel. The team liked you. We're interviewing 2 other candidates this week, but we hope to make a decision by Friday. We'll be in touch." As I drove home, I felt cautiously optimistic. The interview had gone well, better than I'd expected. But I also felt something else, a strange detachment from the outcome, like I wanted the job, hoped for it, but wasn't desperately clinging to it the way I'd been clinging to every opportunity for the past 6 months. Maybe that was what trust looked like. Doing your best, and then releasing the outcome, hoping without demanding, trying without controlling. That afternoon I did something I'd been putting off for weeks. I called Amanda. We hadn't spoken since the breakup 3 months ago. I'd wanted to call so many times, to apologize, to explain, to try to fix things, but I'd been too ashamed to reach out while I was still unemployed and struggling. She answered on the 3rd ring. "Daniel? Hi? Hi, Amanda. I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I wanted to call and I wanted to apologize for how things ended, for how I was during those last few months." There was a pause. "Okay, I'm listening. You were right when you said I was consumed by the unemployment. I was. I couldn't see anything else, couldn't be present with you, couldn't give you what you needed. And I'm sorry. You deserved better than what I was able to give. I appreciate you saying that. It was really hard, Daniel, watching you spiral and not being able to help, feeling like I didn't matter because all you could think about was finding a job. I know, and you did matter. You mattered so much. But I was drowning and I didn't know how to let anyone help me. I just kept pulling away from everyone, including you. So what's different now? Are you calling because you got a job? Because things are better? No, I had an interview today that went well. But that's not why I'm calling. I'm calling because I've realized some things about myself, about what I was trying to control, about what actually matters. And I wanted you to know that I'm sorry, that you were right to leave when you did, that I needed to hit rock bottom before I could see how badly I was handling everything. Amanda was quiet for a moment. I'm glad you're doing that work, Daniel, really. But I need you to know, I'm seeing someone. It's still new, but it's good, and I'm not looking to revisit what we had. The words stung, but not as much as I'd expected. I understand. I'm not calling to try to get back together. I'm just calling to apologize and to, I don't know, close that chapter with honesty instead of leaving it unfinished. I appreciate that, and for what it's worth, I hope things work out for you. I hope you find what you're looking for. After we hung up, I sat with the loss. Amanda was really gone. That door was really closed. The future we'd planned, marriage, kids, building a life together, that wasn't happening. But strangely, instead of the crushing grief I'd expected, I felt something closer to acceptance, maybe even gratitude. Not that the relationship had ended, but that I could finally be honest about it, that I could acknowledge the loss without being destroyed by it. You will not lose anything if you trust in me. I was starting to see what that meant. Yes, I'd lost Amanda, lost the relationship, the future we'd planned, but I hadn't lost my capacity to love, to learn, to grow. I hadn't lost my worth as a person. Those things couldn't be taken away by a breakup or a job loss or an eviction notice. Tuesday, I met Chris from church for coffee. He'd texted the day before asking if I wanted to grab lunch. I'd suggested coffee instead, easier on my limited budget, and he'd agreed immediately. We met at a small cafe near downtown. Chris ordered a latte. I got black coffee. We settled into a booth by the window. "So how'd the interview go yesterday?" he asked. "Really well, actually. Better than I expected. They're deciding by Friday." "That's great. And how are you doing with everything else? The eviction situation?" "Better. My family helped out. I'm not homeless. Still broke, but not homeless." Chris smiled. "That's huge. Accepting help is hard, isn't it? The hardest thing I've ever done. I've spent my whole adult life being the one who had it together, who helped other people. Being on the receiving end feels vulnerable." "Yeah, I get that. When I went through bankruptcy and my divorce, I had to move in with my parents at 32 years old. Felt like a complete failure. But you know what I learned? Pride is expensive, and vulnerability is actually the path to connection, not isolation. We talked for 2 hours. About his story, the business that failed, the marriage that fell apart, the depression that followed. About how hitting rock bottom had actually been the beginning of his real life, not the end of it. I thought losing everything meant I had nothing left, Chris said, but it actually meant I was finally free to discover what I couldn't lose. My identity had been wrapped up in being successful, being married, having it all together. When all that was stripped away, I had to figure out who I was without those things, and that's when I found God. Or maybe that's when I finally let God find me. How do you know when it's God speaking versus just your own thoughts? I asked. I had this experience last week where I felt like God spoke to me, but part of me wonders if I just made it up because I was desperate. What did he say? You will not lose anything if you trust in me. Chris nodded slowly. That sounds like God. Not because it promises easy circumstances, but because it points to something deeper than circumstances. God's voice usually does that. It challenges how we're seeing things, offers a different perspective, points to truth we can't see on our own. But how do I trust when everything is falling apart? Trust isn't a feeling, Daniel. It's a choice. It's choosing to believe that God is good and has your best interest at heart, even when your circumstances say otherwise. You trust by taking the next right step, even when you can't see how it'll all work out. You trust by accepting help instead of insisting on independence. You trust by being honest about your struggle instead of pretending you're fine. His words resonated. I'd been taking steps of trust without even realizing it, calling my mom, accepting money from my family, going to church, having this conversation. Trust wasn't some grand mystical experience. It was a series of small choices to do things differently than I'd been doing them. Wednesday evening, I went to the men's group Chris had invited me to. It met at the church, in a small room off the main lobby. 8 guys total, ranging from mid-20s to mid-50s. Chris introduced me, and we went around sharing updates. One guy, Jason, talked about struggling at work. Another, Miguel, shared about tension in his marriage. A younger guy named Tyler talked about feeling directionless in his career, each one honest about real struggles, no pretense or performance. When it came to me, I decided to risk vulnerability. I'm Daniel. This is my first time here. I lost my job 6 months ago, almost got evicted last week, and I'm basically starting my life over at 31. And I'm trying to figure out what it means to trust God through all of this. The responses were immediate and supportive. Several guys shared similar experiences: job loss, financial crisis, seasons of uncertainty. They asked questions not to judge but to understand. They offered practical help, connection to job opportunities, invitation to other events, offers to meet for coffee or meals. This is a safe place, Chris said. We're all trying to follow Jesus while dealing with real life. None of us have it all figured out, but we're in it together. By the end of the evening, I had 5 new phone numbers, 3 coffee invitations, and a sense that I'd found something I didn't know I'd been missing. Community. Real community. Not based on success or image, but based on shared humanity and shared faith. Thursday afternoon, my phone rang. Rebecca from Apex. Daniel, hi. Thanks for coming in Monday. The team was really impressed with you. Thank you. I enjoyed meeting everyone. I wanted to give you an update. We're moving forward with one of the other candidates. You were a close second, and if things don't work out with our first choice, we'll definitely reach out. But I wanted to let you know where we landed. My stomach dropped. I understand. Thank you for letting me know. Daniel, you interviewed really well. I hope you find something soon. You clearly have the skills and experience. After we hung up, I sat on my mattress on the floor, processing. I hadn't gotten the job. The opportunity that had seemed so promising, that had felt like maybe it was God's provision, gone. The old Daniel would have spiraled, would have catastrophized this into proof that nothing would ever work out, that I was doomed to fail, that God wasn't real or didn't care. But something was different now. Yes, I was disappointed. Yes, I was worried about money and the future. But underneath the disappointment was something solid, a foundation that didn't crumble just because one door closed. I prayed. God, I don't understand. I thought maybe this job was the answer. I thought maybe this was how you were going to provide. But it didn't work out, and I don't know what to do now. I sat in the silence, waiting, and slowly a thought formed. Not my usual anxious thoughts, but something deeper. One closed door isn't the end of the story. Trust doesn't mean every door opens. It means believing I'm leading you somewhere, even when the path isn't clear. Friday morning, I got a call from Mark, my former colleague, who'd offered to connect me with a staffing agency. Daniel, I talked to my contact at Tempforce. They have a contract position that just opened up. 6-month contract. Could potentially go permanent. Financial analyst role at a tech startup. Interested? Absolutely. Great. I'll send you the details. They want to move quickly. Interview would be next week. Another opportunity. Different from Apex, but still something. That evening I went back to Grace Community Church for a Friday night service. Smaller crowd than Sunday, maybe 200 people. The pastor taught about Joseph from the Bible, a guy who got betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, thrown in prison, lost everything repeatedly. But through it all, God was working a purpose Joseph couldn't see. Joseph couldn't see the big picture while he was in the pit or the prison, the pastor said. All he could see was loss, betrayal, injustice. But God was weaving all of it together into something redemptive. Joseph had to lose his position in his family to eventually save his family. He had to go to Egypt to be in position to provide for them during famine. The loss was leading somewhere, even when it looked like just loss. I felt those words land on me with weight. What if my losses were leading somewhere too? What if the job loss, the financial crisis, the broken relationship, what if all of it was somehow part of a bigger story I couldn't see yet? After the service, the pastor stood near the front, available for anyone who wanted to talk. I hesitated, then walked up. Hi, I'm Daniel. I'm new here. Started coming last Sunday. Welcome, Daniel. I'm Pastor James. What brings you to Grace Community? Honestly, desperation. I lost my job 6 months ago, almost got evicted last week, and in the middle of it all I prayed for the first time in years. And I felt like God spoke to me. So I came here to figure out what that means. Pastor James smiled. Desperation is often what brings us to God. We exhaust our own resources, our own solutions, and finally we cry out, and He meets us there. What did God say to you? You will not lose anything if you trust in me. Powerful words, and they're true. Everything in this world is temporary. Jobs, money, relationships, health. But what God gives, His presence, His peace, His purpose, that can't be taken away. Sounds like He's teaching you to build your life on a different foundation. But how do I do that? How do I trust when I still need a job, an income, and a place to live? You trust by taking the next right step, even when you can't see the whole path. You trust by being honest about your need instead of pretending you're self-sufficient. You trust by staying connected to community, even when you're struggling. You trust by choosing to believe God is working, even when circumstances say otherwise. He paused. And Daniel, the fact that you're here, that you're asking these questions, that you're being vulnerable about your struggle, that's trust in action. You're already doing it. As I drove home that night, I thought about the week. I'd had an interview that didn't lead to a job. I'd called Amanda and got closure on that relationship. I'd connected with Chris and the men's group. I'd received another opportunity through Mark. I'd started understanding what trust actually looked like in practice. Nothing was solved. I still didn't have a job, still didn't have financial security, still didn't know what my future looked like. But I wasn't carrying it alone anymore. And I was learning that there was a difference between having life figured out and trusting the one who had life figured out. You will not lose anything if you trust in me. I was beginning to understand. Trust wasn't about guaranteeing outcomes. It was about believing I was held by someone bigger than my circumstances. It was about building my identity on something that couldn't be taken away by job loss or rejection or hardship. And slowly, one day at a time, one choice at a time, I was learning to let go of what I could lose and hold on to what I couldn't. The interview with the tech startup happened Tuesday morning at their office in a converted warehouse downtown. The company was called Nexus Analytics, only 3 years old, but growing fast. They needed a financial analyst to help manage their rapid expansion. The hiring manager, a woman named Sarah, was probably 10 years younger than me, wearing jeans and a company t-shirt. The whole vibe was different from the corporate environments I was used to. Open floor plan, beanbag chairs in corners, a ping-pong table by the kitchen. It felt more like a college dorm than a workplace. "So tell me about your experience," Sarah said, pulling up my resume on her laptop. I walked her through my background at Meridian, the types of analysis I'd done, the projects I'd led, and when she asked about the employment gap, I gave the same honest answer I'd given at Apex. "I appreciate the transparency," Sarah said. "We're a startup, so we move fast and things change constantly. We need people who can handle uncertainty and pivot quickly. Sounds like you've been getting a crash course in that." "Definitely. The past 6 months have taught me a lot about adapting to circumstances I can't control. The contract is 6 months, with possibility of conversion to full-time if it's a good fit on both sides. Pay is $65,000 annually, so about $32.50 for the 6 months, health benefits included. When could you start?" "Immediately." Sarah smiled. "That's what I like to hear. Let me introduce you to a couple of team members, get their input, and we should have a decision by end of week." I met with 2 other people, James, the CFO who was only 29, and Maria, another analyst I'd be working with. Both asked good questions, seemed engaged, and the culture felt collaborative rather than cutthroat. As I drove home, I felt cautiously hopeful, different from how I'd felt after Apex. Less desperate, less clinging to the outcome. More like, this could be good, but if it's not, something else will be. That afternoon, I did something I'd been avoiding for months. I went to my parents' house. They lived in a suburb about 30 minutes away, in the same house I'd grown up in. When I pulled up, my mom was already standing on the porch, having heard my car. She came down the steps and hugged me before I could even get my keys out of the ignition. "Daniel, oh honey, it's so good to see you." "Hi, Mom." My dad appeared in the doorway, waved. Come in. Your mother's been cooking all morning." Inside, the house smelled like my childhood, whatever spice blend my mom always used, the faint scent of coffee always brewing, something baking in the oven. It was overwhelmingly familiar and comforting in a way I hadn't expected. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd done homework as a kid, where we'd had family dinners every night. My mom set out food like I'd been starving for weeks. Tamales, rice, beans, fresh tortillas. "Mom, this is too much. You're too skinny. Eat." My dad asked about the job search, about how I was really doing. And for the first time, I was completely honest with them about the depression of the past 6 months, about the shame I'd been carrying, about how close I'd come to giving up. "I thought you were handling it well," my dad said. "You kept saying everything was fine." I was lying. I was ashamed to admit I was struggling. "You both worked so hard to give me opportunities, to help me succeed, and I felt like I'd failed you by losing my job and not being able to bounce back." My mom reached across the table and took my hand. "Daniel, you could never fail us, never. You're our son. Your worth has nothing to do with your job or your income or whether you have everything figured out. But I should have it figured out by now. I'm 31. Nobody has it figured out," my dad said. "I'm 63 and I'm still figuring things out. Life doesn't work like that. You don't reach some age where suddenly you have all the answers. You just learn to handle the uncertainty better." We talked for 3 hours about their own struggles when they were younger, times when money was tight, when my dad lost a job, when they weren't sure how they'd make ends meet. Stories I'd never heard before, because they'd protected us from knowing how hard things had been sometimes. "We didn't want you and Alex to worry," my mom said, "but maybe we should have been more honest. Maybe if you'd known that struggle was normal, you wouldn't have felt so ashamed when it happened to you." Before I left, my dad pulled me aside. "Daniel, I want you to know something. The money we gave you, that's not a loan. That's a gift. You don't owe us anything." "Okay, Dad, I'll pay you back as soon as... I'm serious. That money is given freely, no strings attached. And if you need more, if things get tight again, you tell us. You don't suffer in silence. That's not how family works. Driving home, I felt the weight of shame lifting. Not completely, it was still there, but lighter, because I'd been honest and they hadn't rejected me. They'd loved me through it. They'd reminded me that my worth wasn't tied to my success. Thursday, I got a call from Sarah at Nexus. Daniel, we'd like to offer you the position. Can you start Monday? Relief washed over me. Yes, absolutely, thank you. Great. I'll send over the paperwork today. Welcome to Nexus. I immediately called my mom, then Alex, then texted Chris. Within an hour, I had a dozen congratulatory messages. The men's group created a group text to celebrate. Chris invited me to dinner that weekend to mark the occasion. At the Friday night service at Grace Community, Pastor James talked about the Israelites crossing the Red Sea, how they couldn't see the path forward until they stepped into the water, how God often doesn't show us the whole plan, just the next step, and we have to trust enough to take that step before we see how it'll all work out. Faith isn't believing that everything will work out exactly how you want, Pastor James said. Faith is believing that God is working even when you can't see it. Even when the path isn't clear, even when you're in the midst of loss and uncertainty. After the service, I thanked him for his words the week before. I got a job offer this week. It's a contract position, not permanent, but it's something, and I don't think I would have been able to receive it if I hadn't started learning to trust. That's wonderful, Daniel, but remember, trust isn't just for the hard times. You'll need to keep trusting even when things are going well. Because the point isn't to get you to a place where you don't need God anymore. The point is to teach you that you always need Him in every season. Saturday, Chris invited me to his house for dinner. His wife, Lauren, was warm and welcoming. Their 2 kids, ages 5 and 7, were full of energy and questions. We ate on their back patio as the sun set, and I felt a pang of longing for what they had. The family. The stability, the simple joy of an ordinary Saturday evening. So you start Monday? Lauren asked. Yeah, first real job in 6 months. Feels surreal. I remember when Chris was unemployed, she said. It was so hard on both of us. The stress, the uncertainty, the shame he was carrying. I'm glad we're on the other side of it, but I'm also grateful for what that season taught us. What did it teach you? That we're stronger together than separate, that vulnerability isn't weakness, that God is faithful even when circumstances aren't easy, and that what you build in the hard times, the faith, the community, the trust, that's what sustains you through everything else. After dinner, Chris and I sat on his back porch while Lauren put the kids to bed. Can I ask you something? I said. How do you not go back to old patterns? How do you keep trusting instead of reverting to trying to control everything? Honestly, it's a daily choice, sometimes an hourly choice. I still catch myself trying to control outcomes, trying to guarantee security, trying to make sure I never end up in that dark place again. But I've learned to recognize the pattern now, and when I catch myself doing it, I pause and ask, am I trusting God or trusting myself? And what if you fail again? What if you lose everything again? Then I'd be going through it with faith and community this time, instead of alone and ashamed. That's the difference. Not that life won't have hard seasons, but that you know how to walk through them differently. Sunday morning at church, Pastor James asked me to share briefly during announcements about my job news. I stood in front of 500 people, just 2 weeks after first walking into this building, and told a condensed version of my story. 3 weeks ago, I was about to be evicted. No job, no money, no options. And in desperation, I prayed for the first time in years. And God spoke to me. He said, "You will not lose anything if you trust in me." And I didn't understand what that meant because I was losing everything. But now I'm starting to get it. I paused, looking out at the faces. Some understanding, some curious, all attentive. I lost my job, my savings, my apartment, my relationship, but what I gained, what I'm gaining is something I can't lose. Faith, community, a foundation that isn't based on my circumstances. and a job starting tomorrow that I wouldn't have without the people in this church who supported me, prayed for me, and reminded me I wasn't alone. The response was overwhelming. After the service, dozens of people came up to share their own stories of loss and provision, to thank me for being vulnerable, to celebrate the job offer. One older woman said, "God is teaching you what can't be taken away. That's the most valuable lesson you'll ever learn." That afternoon, I went back to my apartment, still mostly empty, but not as depressing as it had been a few weeks ago. I sat on the floor with my laptop and did something I'd been thinking about for days. I started writing, not job applications, not emails, but my story. Everything that had happened over the past 6 months, the loss, the desperation, the moment God spoke, the journey since. I didn't know if anyone would ever read it, but I needed to capture it while it was fresh. As I wrote, I realized something. The story wasn't over. This wasn't a neat conclusion where everything wrapped up perfectly. I was starting a contract job, not a permanent position. I still had debt. I still had wounds from the past 6 months. But the story had shifted from one of pure loss to one of redemption in progress. "You will not lose anything if you trust in me." Those words had proven true in ways I never expected. Not because my circumstances had immediately improved. They hadn't. But because I'd discovered something more solid than circumstances, a foundation that held even when everything else was shaking. Monday morning, I woke up at 6 for my first day at Nexus Analytics. I put on business casual clothes. What I'd been told was standard for the startup environment. As I got ready, I prayed, "God, thank you for this opportunity. I don't know how long it'll last or where it'll lead, but I'm grateful. Help me do good work. Help me remember that my worth isn't in this job, but in you. Help me keep trusting." The first day was overwhelming in the best way. Information overload, company systems, project briefings, meeting the team, trying to absorb 6 months of context in a few hours. But it felt good to be productive again, to use my brain, to contribute something. At lunch, Maria, the other analyst, invited me to eat with her and a few others in the common area. "So how'd you end up at Nexus?" she asked. "Long story, but basically I lost my job 6 months ago, went through hell, and a connection from my old company connected me with the recruiter who placed me here." 6 months? That's rough, but I'm glad you're here. We need the help. Over the next few days, I settled into the rhythm. The work was challenging but manageable. The team was supportive. Sarah was a good manager, clear about expectations, available for questions, but not micromanaging. It wasn't perfect, no job is, but it was good. Friday afternoon, Sarah stopped by my desk. "Hey, Daniel, how's the first week been?" "Really good. Lot to learn, but I'm getting there." "You're doing great. Quick question. How flexible is your schedule?" "We're working on a big project with a tight deadline. Would you be able to put in some extra hours over the next few weeks if needed?" The old Daniel would have immediately said yes, eager to prove himself, scared to set any boundaries. But something had changed. "I can do some extra hours, yeah, but I need to keep my Sundays and Wednesday evenings. I've committed to some things at my church, and those are non-negotiable for me." Sarah nodded. "That's totally fine. I appreciate you being upfront about it. We can work around that." After she walked away, I realized what I'd just done. I'd set a boundary. I'd prioritized something other than work. I'd made it clear that my job wasn't my whole identity, and she'd respected it. "You will not lose anything if you trust in me." I'd been so afraid of losing opportunities, of being seen as not committed enough, of jeopardizing my position. But by being honest about my priorities, I hadn't lost anything. I'd actually gained respect and established healthy boundaries from the start. That evening at the men's group, I shared about the first week. "It's going really well, but I'm also noticing how easy it would be to fall back into old patterns, making work my whole identity, letting it consume me, proving my worth through performance." "So how do you prevent that?" Jason asked. "I think by remembering what the past 6 months taught me, that my worth isn't in my job, that success isn't the same as significance, that there's a difference between working hard and finding identity in work. Chris nodded. That's wisdom, man. Hold on to that, because the temptation to revert is real. Especially when things are going well, when you're getting positive feedback, when you start to feel secure again. That's when it's easy to forget why you needed God in the first place. As I drove home that night, reflecting on the week, I felt profound gratitude, not just for the job, though I was grateful for that, but for everything I'd learned through the loss, everything I'd gained that couldn't be taken away. I'd learned what real community looked like. I'd learned that vulnerability was strength, not weakness. I'd learned that my worth wasn't tied to my productivity. I'd learned that trust wasn't passive. It was active choice after active choice. And I'd learned that God was faithful, even when, especially when, I had nothing left to offer but desperate honesty. You will not lose anything if you trust in me. The words had been true, not in the way I'd initially thought, not by preventing loss or guaranteeing outcomes, but by teaching me that underneath every loss was something that couldn't be lost, a foundation that held, a presence that remained, a purpose that transcended circumstances, and that was worth more than anything I'd lost along the way. 3 months into the contract at Nexus Analytics, life had settled into a rhythm I hadn't experienced in almost a year, the rhythm of normalcy. I woke up, went to work, did my job, came home. Simple, stable, almost boring after the chaos of the previous months. But I was learning that boring was beautiful, that stability was a gift, that having a routine was something to be grateful for, not take for granted. The work itself was challenging in good ways. Nexus was growing fast. They'd secured major funding and were expanding into new markets. My job involved building financial models to help them make smart decisions about where to allocate resources, which projects to pursue, which risks to take. Sarah had become not just a boss, but a mentor. She was brilliant at what she did, and she took time to teach me the startup world, how it was different from corporate, how to move fast without being reckless, how to balance growth ambitions with financial reality. One afternoon in late October, she called me into her office. "Daniel, close the door. I want to talk to you about something." My immediate reaction was the old anxiety. "You're in trouble. You messed up. The contract isn't being renewed." But I caught the thought, recognized it as fear rather than fact, and waited for actual information. "You've been doing really good work," Sarah said. "The financial projections you put together for the board meeting last week were exactly what we needed. And I've been talking with James about your contract. Okay, we'd like to convert you to full-time, permanent position, full benefits, salary bump to 75,000. What do you think?" Relief and gratitude washed over me. "I think yes. Definitely yes, thank you. You've earned it. You're reliable, you're smart, you adapt quickly, and you've integrated well with the team. We want to keep you around." After the meeting, I sat at my desk processing. A permanent job, real stability, 75,000 a year, more than I'd been making at Meridian. Health insurance, 401k, paid time off. All the things I'd taken for granted before losing them, now restored. I immediately texted my mom. "They're making the position permanent. I have a real job again." Her response came seconds later. "I'm crying. So proud of you. God is faithful." That evening at the men's group, I shared the news. The response was celebration. High fives, backslaps, genuine joy from guys who'd walked with me through the uncertainty. "This is huge, man," Chris said. "Not just the job itself, but what it represents. You're on the other side of the crisis." "It feels surreal," I admitted. 6 months ago, I was sleeping on a mattress on the floor of an empty apartment, about to be evicted. Now, I have a permanent job, and I'm actually saving money again. "So what's different this time?" Miguel asked. "How do you make sure you don't fall back into making work your identity like before?" It was a good question, one I'd been thinking about a lot. I think the difference is that I know what it's like to lose everything now. And I know that losing everything externally doesn't mean losing everything that matters. My worth isn't in the job. It's in who God says I am. The job is a gift, but it's not my identity. Tyler, the youngest in the group, spoke up. That's what I'm trying to learn now, before I have to lose everything to figure it out. How do you hold success loosely? How do you enjoy blessings without clinging to them? I don't think you can learn it theoretically, Jason said. You have to experience loss to really understand it. But maybe you can learn from other people's experiences enough that your own losses don't devastate you the same way. The conversation continued for another hour, about success and failure, about building identity on the right foundation, about stewarding blessings without worshipping them. These men had become like brothers to me, not because we had surface-level friendships, but because we'd chosen to be vulnerable with each other, to support each other through real struggles. The next Sunday, Pastor James preached about the rich young ruler from the Gospels, the guy who came to Jesus asking what he needed to do to inherit eternal life. Jesus told him to sell everything and follow him, and the man went away sad because he had great wealth. Jesus wasn't saying wealth is bad, Pastor James explained. He was saying, what are you clinging to? What have you made your security? What would you not be willing to lose? For this man, it was his wealth. Jesus was offering him something infinitely more valuable, but the man couldn't receive it because his hands were too full of what he already had. The message hit me hard, not because I was wealthy, I wasn't, but because I understood clinging. I'd spent 6 months desperately clinging to my old life, my old identity, my old securities. And I'd had to have it all pried away before I could receive what God was offering, a new foundation, a new identity, a new trust. After the service, Pastor James found me. Daniel, good to see you. How are things? Really good. They made my contract position permanent this week. That's wonderful. I'm happy for you, and I want to ask you something. Would you be willing to share your full testimony at a service sometime? Not just a brief update, but the whole story. I think it could really encourage people who are in the middle of their own losses. The thought terrified me, standing in front of the whole church, being that vulnerable, exposing that much of my struggle and weakness. But I'd learned that fear wasn't a reason to say no. Yeah, I'd be willing to do that. Great, let's plan for 3 weeks from now. That'll give you time to prepare. And Daniel, tell the truth. Don't sanitize it or make it sound easier than it was. The power is in the honesty. Over the next few weeks, I worked on my testimony, writing out the story in detail, the job loss, the financial spiral, the eviction notice, the desperate prayer, the words God spoke, the journey since. Every time I wrote about it, I felt again how close I'd come to complete collapse. But I also saw more clearly how God had been working through it all, even in the parts that felt like pure darkness at the time. The permanent position at Nexus came with new responsibilities. Sarah asked me to start training a new contract analyst who was joining the team, a woman named Rachel, who'd recently moved to the city. She reminded me of myself 6 months ago, capable but anxious, eager to prove herself, carrying some invisible weight. During her second week, we went to lunch together. So, what brought you to Nexus? I asked. Needed a fresh start. I was at a consulting firm in Chicago, but it was toxic. Overwork, no boundaries, constant pressure. I got to the point where I couldn't do it anymore. So I quit without having something else lined up, moved here where my sister lives, and started looking for work. That takes courage. Quitting without another job lined up. Or stupidity. I'm still not sure which. But I knew if I stayed, I was going to burn out completely. So I took the risk. Can I tell you something? I was unemployed for 6 months before getting this job. It was the hardest thing I've ever been through. But it taught me more than any job ever could. Her eyes widened. Really? You seem so together. I'm not. I'm just better at accepting that I don't have to be. There's a difference. We talked for an hour. About her struggles with work-life balance, about my journey through unemployment and faith, about what it means to build your life on something other than career success. She seemed relieved to hear someone be honest about struggle, about not having it all figured out. "Thank you for sharing that with me," she said as we walked back to the office. It helps to know I'm not the only one who's been through hard stuff. You're definitely not the only one. And if you ever need to talk, I'm around. I know what it's like to feel like you're drowning. A few days later, Rachel came to my desk. Hey, you mentioned that you go to a church. Would it be weird if I came with you sometime? I've been thinking, I need something. I don't know, something more than just work and Netflix. Not weird at all. Come this Sunday. I'll save you a seat. Sunday morning, Rachel met me at Grace Community. I introduced her to Chris and his wife, to some of the guys from the men's group, to Pastor James. She seemed overwhelmed, but in a good way, like she'd found something she didn't know she'd been looking for. That service was the one where I was scheduled to share my testimony. As Pastor James introduced me, I felt the familiar anxiety. What if people judge you? What if you seem weak? What if this is a mistake? But underneath the anxiety was something stronger, a sense that this was why I'd gone through everything, not just for my own growth, but to help others who were facing their own impossibilities. I stood on stage, looked out at the congregation, and told my story. All of it. The job loss that had felt like the end of the world. The financial devastation, the eviction notice, the desperate prayer, the words God had spoken, "You will not lose anything if you trust in me." I talked about how I'd misunderstood those words at first, how I'd thought they meant my circumstances would immediately improve, how I'd learned they meant something much deeper, that what I could lose was never what mattered most anyway. I lost my job, I said. I lost my apartment. I lost my girlfriend. I lost my savings. I lost my sense of identity as someone who had life figured out. But what I gained, what God gave me that I couldn't lose, was infinitely more valuable. I gained faith. I gained community. I gained a foundation that doesn't depend on my circumstances. I gained the knowledge that my worth isn't in what I achieve, but in whose I am. Adi shared about the journey since, the false starts and closed doors, the eventually permanent position at Nexus, the ongoing work of learning to trust instead of control. I'm not standing here to tell you that faith guarantees easy circumstances, I said. It doesn't, but I am telling you that what you're afraid of losing probably isn't what you think it is, and what God wants to give you, presence, peace, purpose, unshakable foundation, that's something no crisis can take away. When I finished, there was a moment of silence, then applause, and after the service, dozens of people came up to me, some sharing their own stories of loss, some thanking me for being vulnerable, some asking how to start trusting when they were in the middle of their own crises. One man, probably in his 50s, said with tears in his eyes, "I lost my business 3 years ago, and I've been too ashamed to tell anyone at church. I thought they'd think less of me. Thank you for making it safe to be honest about struggle." Rachel found me afterward. That was incredibly brave, and it's exactly what I needed to hear. I've been so scared about my decision to quit my job without a plan. But hearing your story, it helped me believe that maybe I'm not making a huge mistake. Maybe I'm just trusting God in a way I haven't before. That evening, Chris texted me, "Great job today. I'm proud of you." And I think this is just the beginning of how God's going to use your story. Over the next few weeks, I kept hearing from people who'd been at the service. Some had started going to therapy. Some had been honest with family about struggles they'd been hiding. Some had started attending the men's group or other support groups at the church. My story had given them permission to stop pretending they had it all together. At work, things continued to go well. James, the CFO, started including me in higher-level strategic discussions. Sarah gave me more responsibility, more autonomy. I was contributing in meaningful ways, and it felt good. But I was also learning to hold it loosely, to be grateful for the opportunity without making it my identity, to work hard without finding my worth in productivity, to succeed without needing success to feel okay about myself. One evening in November, I was having dinner with my parents at their house. As we ate, my dad said, "Daniel, I want to tell you something. Watching you go through the past year, watching you lose everything and then rebuild, it's been hard as your father. I wanted to fix it for you, but I'm proud of how you've handled it, how you've been honest, how you've accepted help, how you've grown through it. Thanks, Dad. And I want to apologize. I think I raised you and Alex to believe that success was the most important thing. That having your life together, achieving things, climbing the ladder, that's what mattered. But you've taught me something different. You've shown me that character matters more than achievement. That vulnerability is stronger than pretense. That there's more to life than career success. I felt unexpected emotion rising. You didn't fail, Dad. You gave me a strong work ethic and high standards. That's not bad. I just had to learn the hard way that those things can't be my foundation. We talked for a long time that evening about faith, about what really matters, about how to live well instead of just successfully. My parents were attending Grace Community now. They'd started coming after hearing my testimony, wanting to understand the faith that had sustained me through crisis. You will not lose anything if you trust in me. Those words, spoken to me on my darkest night, had proven true in ways I never could have imagined. Not because my circumstances had magically fixed themselves, but because I'd discovered that underneath every loss was something that couldn't be lost. My worth wasn't in my job. It was in God's love. My security wasn't in my bank account. It was in God's faithfulness. My identity wasn't in my achievements. It was in being God's child. My hope wasn't in my ability to control outcomes. It was in God's sovereignty. All of those things, worth, security, identity, hope, they couldn't be taken away by job loss or financial crisis or broken relationships or any other circumstance. They were gifts that came from trusting God, not from managing my life perfectly. I still had moments of anxiety, still caught myself trying to control things I couldn't control, still felt the pull toward making work or money or success my foundation again. But I recognized those patterns faster now. And I had tools to redirect: prayer, community, remembering what I'd learned through loss, choosing trust over fear. The contract position that had felt like a temporary fix had become a permanent job. The crisis that had felt like the end had become a beginning. The loss that had felt like devastation had become the foundation for a life built on something unshakable. And I was learning that this was what redemption looked like. Not that bad things didn't happen, but that God could take even the worst things and weave them into something beautiful. That he could take my greatest losses and use them to teach me what couldn't be lost. 3 months since the permanent offer. 9 months since the desperate prayer. A lifetime of difference in how I saw the world, saw myself, saw God, and I was just beginning to understand how deep the transformation went. 6 months into my permanent position at Nexus Analytics, 1 year since the night God had spoken those words on my balcony, life looked completely different. I'd moved into a new apartment, a 1-bedroom in a better neighborhood. I had furniture again, actual furniture, not just a mattress on the floor. I'd paid off the debt to my landlord, started rebuilding my savings, even begun contributing to my 401k again. On paper, I'd recovered. The crisis was over. The storm had passed. But I was learning that the real test of what you've learned doesn't come during the crisis. It comes after, when life stabilizes, when you're tempted to go back to old patterns, when you have to choose whether the transformation was real or just temporary survival mode. It was December, and Nexus was in the middle of year-end planning. The company had grown significantly. We'd tripled our client base, secured another major funding round, expanded to 3 new markets. Success by every measure. And with that success came pressure, long hours, high expectations. One evening in mid-December, I was working late. Again. It was 8 p.m., and I was the only one left in the office. Sarah had left at 6, telling me not to stay too late. But I wanted to finish the financial projections for the board meeting the next day, wanted them to be perfect, wanted to prove I was worth the permanent position and the raise. My phone rang. Chris. Hey man, where are you? Men's group started 30 minutes ago. I looked at my laptop, at the spreadsheets still needing work. Oh no, I completely forgot. I'm sorry, I'm at work. You've missed the last 2 weeks. Is everything okay? Yeah, just busy with year-end stuff. I'll be there next week, I promise. Daniel, be honest with me. Are you falling back into old patterns? The question hit me harder than I expected. What do you mean? Making work your whole life. Letting it consume you. Measuring your worth by your productivity. Sound familiar? I wanted to defend myself, to explain that this was different, that I was just working hard because it was a crucial time for the company. But even as I thought it, I recognized the lie. This was exactly what I'd done at Meridian, poured everything into work, made it my identity, believed my worth depended on my performance. You're right, I admitted. I've been slipping back into it without even realizing. And come to group next week. We need to talk about this. You can't save yourself from the same drowning twice if you keep jumping back in the pool. After we hung up, I sat in the empty office, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, and felt the truth of his words sink in. I'd been so focused on rebuilding financially, on proving myself at work, on securing my position, that I'd started making work my God again. Different job, same idol. I closed my laptop, left the projections unfinished, and went home. The next morning at the board meeting, James presented the financial projections I'd prepared. They were good, not perfect, but good enough, and the board approved the plans. Nobody mentioned that the projections could have been more detailed. Nobody criticized the work. It had been enough. I realized I'd been chasing perfection that nobody was asking for, working hours nobody expected, trying to prove something that didn't need proving. The old anxiety, the old insecurity, the old belief that I had to earn my worth through performance, it had quietly crept back in. That Sunday, Pastor James preached about the parable of the talents, the story of 3 servants given different amounts of money to steward. 2 invested and grew what they were given. One buried his in fear and returned only what he'd started with. The 1 talent servant was paralyzed by fear, Pastor James said. Fear of failure, fear of loss, fear of not being enough, and that fear kept him from using what he'd been given. But notice, the master doesn't rebuke him for not achieving enough. He rebukes him for not trying because of fear. He paused, looking out at the congregation. Some of you have been through seasons of loss, and now that you're recovering, you're tempted to go one of 2 directions. Either you bury what you have in fear of losing it again, playing it safe, never risking, or you work obsessively to secure what you have, convinced that if you just work hard enough, plan well enough, you can guarantee you'll never face loss again. I felt those words land on me like an arrow finding its target. I'd swung from one extreme to the other, from buried in fear during unemployment to obsessively working to secure my position now. But both of those responses are rooted in the same thing: trusting yourself instead of trusting God. Real trust looks like stewardship without obsession, working hard without finding identity in work, building your life without making security your God. After the service, I asked Pastor James if we could talk. We went to his office, a small room off the main lobby, and I told him what had been happening: the long hours, the missed men's groups, the creeping obsession with work performance. I thought I'd learned my lesson, I said. I thought going through unemployment had changed how I saw work, but the past month I've fallen right back into making it my whole identity. That's normal, Daniel. Transformation isn't one and done. It's recognizing the patterns when they start creeping back and choosing differently. The fact that you're seeing it now, that you're naming it, that's growth. Last year, you wouldn't have recognized the pattern until you crashed. So, what do? You remember what God told you. You will not lose anything if you trust in me. That's still true. You're not going to lose your job by setting healthy boundaries. You're not going to lose your worth by not being perfect. You're not going to lose your security by trusting God instead of trusting your performance. That he leaned forward. And Daniel, I think you need to start saying no to some things, not because you can't handle them, but because you need to practice trusting that your worth isn't in how much you produce. That week I made changes. I set a firm boundary. No work after 7 p.m. on weekdays, no work at all on Sundays. I told Sarah about it in our one-on-one, expecting pushback. Instead, she said, Good for you. I've been worried you were burning out. We don't need you working those hours. We need you healthy and sustainable. I started going back to men's group consistently, and I was honest with the guys about what had been happening, how I'd slipped back into old patterns, how I'd started finding security in work performance again, how I'd needed Chris's confrontation to wake me up. Thank you for calling me out, I told Chris. I needed that. That's what community is for. We hold each other accountable. We call out the patterns before they become full-blown crises. Rachel, the analyst I'd been mentoring, approached me one day at work. Can I ask you something? You seem different lately. More, I don't know, present, less stressed. I reset some boundaries, realized I was falling into unhealthy work patterns again. How do you know when you're working hard versus working obsessively? For me, it's about why I'm working. If I'm working because the job requires it and I want to do good work, that's healthy. If I'm working because I need to prove my worth, because I'm afraid of losing my position, because my identity depends on being seen as the hardest worker, that's obsessive. That's helpful. I think I've been obsessive my whole career and calling it strong work ethic. We grabbed coffee and talked for an hour about work-life balance, about finding identity outside of career, about what it means to work as worship instead of work as proof of worth. She was hungry for this conversation, for permission to be more than her productivity. Would you ever want to come to my church? I asked. There's a really good community there, people who are learning to build their lives on something other than success. Yeah, I'd like that. The next Sunday, Rachel came to Grace Community again, and this time she kept coming. Within a month, she joined a women's small group, started meeting regularly with one of the women pastors, and had what she described as her own encounter with God. I realized I've been running from emptiness my whole life, she told me over lunch one day, working obsessively, staying busy, never stopping to think about deeper questions. And when I quit my job in Chicago, it wasn't just about the toxic environment. It was about the fact that I'd looked at my life and realized I was building something that would never satisfy me. That's a hard realization, but also liberating. Like once you see that the thing you've been chasing can't actually give you what you need, you're free to chase something else, something real. Watching Rachel's journey reminded me of my own from a year ago, how desperation had driven me to God. How crisis had broken open space for transformation, how loss had revealed what couldn't be lost. Christmas approached, and for the first time in over a year, I felt genuinely grateful rather than anxious. My family gathered at my parents' house, me, Alex and his family, my parents, my aunt and uncle. We ate too much, laughed, shared updates on our lives. During dinner, my mom asked everyone to share something they were grateful for from the past year. When it came to me, I paused, feeling emotion rising. A year ago, I was in the darkest place I've ever been. Unemployed, broke, about to be evicted, completely hopeless. And if someone had told me then that a year later I'd be here, with a good job, a nice apartment, genuine faith, real community, I wouldn't have believed them. So I'm grateful for the journey. Not just where I ended up, but what I learned along the way. That loss isn't the end. That what matters most can't be taken away. That God is faithful even when, especially when, everything else falls apart. My dad raised his glass to second chances, to faith, to family. We all toasted, and I felt the weight of the year, the loss, the learning, the transformation, settle into something like peace. After dinner, Alex pulled me aside. Hey, I wanted to tell you something. Watching you go through this past year, watching how you've handled it, it's changed how I see things too. I've been so focused on climbing the career ladder, on getting the next promotion, on achieving more. But you've shown me there's more to life than that relationships matter more than achievements, that who you are matters more than what you accomplish. Thanks, man. That means a lot, and I'm proud of you, really proud. Not because you got a new job, though I'm happy about that, but because of how you've grown through all this. New Year's Eve, Grace Community had a service focused on reflection and looking forward. Pastor James asked us to think about what we wanted to release from the past year and what we wanted to invite into the new year. I wrote in my journal, releasing, the belief that my worth depends on my performance, the need to control outcomes, the fear of loss, the tendency to find security in circumstances rather than in God. Inviting, deeper trust, sustainable rhythms, healthy boundaries. The courage to keep being vulnerable even when life is going well. The wisdom to remember what I learned through loss, even when I'm not in crisis. As midnight approached, the congregation counted down together. And when we reached 0, when the new year officially began, I felt a profound sense of starting fresh. Not because everything was perfect, it wasn't, but because I was different. Because I'd learned something that couldn't be unlearned. Because I'd discovered a foundation that couldn't be shaken. You will not lose anything if you trust in me. Those words, spoken to me in my darkest moment, had proven true for 12 months. Through the initial crisis, through the slow recovery, through the temptation to fall back into old patterns, they'd held up through testing, they'd proven reliable through application, and I believed they'd keep proving true for whatever came next. Not because my circumstances would always be easy, but because I'd learned that what I couldn't lose was infinitely more valuable than what I could lose. The new year stretched ahead, full of unknowns. But I was facing those unknowns differently than I'd faced them a year ago. Not with certainty about outcomes, but with trust in the one who held the outcomes. Not with guarantees about circumstances, but with confidence in a foundation that held regardless of circumstances. I'd learned to live with open hands, to work hard without making work an idol, to enjoy blessings without clinging to them, to face the future with trust instead of control. And that was freedom, real freedom, the kind that didn't depend on everything going right, the kind that held even when things went wrong, the kind that came not from having life figured out, but from trusting the one who had it figured out. 1 year since the night everything changed, and everything was still changing. But now I was changing with faith instead of fear, with community instead of isolation, with trust instead of control, and that made all the difference. February brought unexpected news. Sarah called me into her office on a Tuesday morning, and from the expression on her face, I knew something significant was coming. "Daniel, close the door. I need to talk to you about something, and I need you to keep this confidential until it's officially announced." My first instinct was still anxiety. You're in trouble. Something's wrong. But I'd learned to catch those thoughts faster now. I waited for actual information. "I'm leaving Nexus," she said. "I've been offered a COO position at another startup. It's an incredible opportunity, and I've decided to take it." Relief that it wasn't about me, immediately followed by concern about what her departure meant for the company and my role. "Wow, congratulations. That's huge. Thank you. And that brings me to why I wanted to talk to you. James and I have been discussing who should take over my position as Director of Finance, and we'd like to offer it to you." I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. "Me?" "Yes. You've proven yourself over the past year. You understand our business model. You work well with the team. You've consistently delivered excellent analysis. James trusts you. I trust you. We think you're ready." "Sarah, I've only been here a year. There are people on the team with more experience." "Experience doesn't always equal capability. You have the skills, you have the temperament, and you have something else that's rare. You don't let your ego drive your decisions. You're confident enough to ask for help when you need it, humble enough to admit when you don't know something. That's what we need in leadership." She slid a paper across her desk. "Here's what the offer looks like. Salary would be $95,000 plus bonus structure tied to company performance. You'd be managing the entire finance team, currently 5 people, probably expanding to 7 or 8 as we grow. You'd report directly to James and have a seat at executive leadership meetings." I looked at the numbers, processing. This was a massive jump, from analyst to director in a year, nearly doubling my salary from when I'd started. leadership responsibility that would normally take years to achieve. I need to think about this, I said. When do you need an answer? End of week. I'm officially announcing my departure Monday, and we want to announce your promotion at the same time, assuming you accept. That evening I called Chris. We met at a coffee shop and I told him about the offer. That's incredible, man. Congratulations, but I can hear the hesitation in your voice. What's the concern? A year ago, I had nothing. Now I'm being offered a director position making almost 6 figures. It feels too fast, like I'm going to mess it up. Or like accepting it means I'm chasing success again instead of trusting God. Or, Chris said, maybe this is God providing. Maybe he took you through loss to teach you that your worth isn't in your career. And now he's giving you career success to test whether you learned the lesson. The question isn't whether to accept the opportunity. It's whether you can accept it without making it your identity. How do I know the difference? You know it by checking your motivations. Are you saying yes because you need the position to feel valuable? Or are you saying yes because it's a genuine opportunity to use your gifts and steward resources well? Are you afraid of saying no because you think God will be disappointed? Or are you free to say either yes or no based on wisdom? We talked for 2 hours about calling and gifting, about stewardship and opportunity, about the difference between ambition that serves God and ambition that serves ego. By the end, I had clarity. This was an opportunity I should accept, not because I needed it to feel successful, but because it was a chance to grow, to lead well, to impact the company and the people on my team. I called Pastor James and asked if we could meet. We sat in his office Wednesday afternoon, and I told him about the offer. "What's your gut telling you?" he asked. "That I should accept it. But I'm also scared. Scared I'm not ready. Scared I'll fail. Scared that accepting it means I'm falling back into making work my God." Those are all valid fears. But fear isn't a reason to say no to a legitimate opportunity. What would saying no look like? Would it be wisdom, or would it be hiding? Probably hiding. Staying small because small feels safe. Then I think you have your answer. Accept the position. Lead well. And stay connected to community so we can help you navigate it without losing yourself in it. Thursday, I had dinner with my parents and Alex. I told them about the offer, and their responses were immediate celebration. "Daniel, this is amazing," my mom said. "A director position after just a year? I'm worried I'm not ready." My dad shook his head. "You're never going to feel completely ready for the next level. That's not how growth works. You take the opportunity and you grow into it." Alex added, "And think about where you were 18 months ago. If someone had told you then that you'd be getting offered a director position, you wouldn't have believed them. God's been orchestrating this journey the whole time." Friday morning, I told Sarah I was accepting the position. "I'm so glad," she said. "You're going to do great. And Daniel, don't try to do it alone. Build your team, delegate, ask for help when you need it. Your job isn't to be perfect. It's to lead well." The announcement went out Monday morning. The team's response was supportive. There could have been resentment, people who'd been there longer feeling passed over, but everyone seemed genuinely happy for me. Rachel came to my desk and said, "I'm so grateful you're going to be my boss. I learn more from you than anyone else here." With the promotion came new challenges I hadn't anticipated. The executive leadership meetings revealed tensions I hadn't known existed, disagreements about strategy, concerns about cash flow, personality conflicts among the founders. As director of finance, I was suddenly responsible for making recommendations that would affect the entire company's future. One Tuesday in March, James called an emergency executive meeting. "We have a problem," he said once we were all gathered. "Our largest client just put their contract on hold. That's 30% of our revenue. We need to make some hard decisions." The next 2 hours were intense. Options discussed, layoffs, salary cuts, reducing benefits, pulling back on expansion plans. Every option meant someone losing something. And as director of finance, I was expected to model the financial scenarios, to show what each option would mean for the company's survival. "Give me until tomorrow," I said. "I'll run the numbers and present options with my recommendations." That night, I worked until midnight building financial models, stress testing different scenarios. And as I worked, I prayed. Not just, "Please let this work out" prayers, but honest conversations with God about the weight of responsibility, about the fear of making wrong decisions that would hurt people, about trusting Him in leadership the same way I'd learned to trust Him in unemployment. The next morning, I presented 3 options to the leadership team. Option A, layoffs. Cut 15% of staff, preserve cash, weather the storm. Option B, salary cuts across the board. Everyone takes a 20% pay cut temporarily. No one loses their job. Option C, mixed approach. Reduce some non-essential spending, delay hiring plans, take smaller salary cuts, 10% for 6 months, while actively pursuing new clients. My recommendation is option C, I said. It's the most sustainable. It spreads the pain rather than concentrating it. And it gives us time to replace the lost revenue without destroying morale or losing key people. There was discussion, debate, questions about cash flow and runway and risk tolerance. Finally, James said, "I agree with Daniel. We go with option C." The decision meant I'd be taking a pay cut. My new $95,000 salary would drop to $85,000 for at least 6 months. But I felt peace about it. This was leadership. Making hard choices, taking hits alongside the team, stewarding resources wisely even when it cost personally. That Sunday, Pastor James preached about Jesus washing the disciples' feet, the ultimate example of servant leadership. "Leadership in God's kingdom doesn't look like corporate ladders," he said. "It looks like serving. It looks like using your position to lift others up, not to elevate yourself. It looks like sacrifice, not self-interest." And the message resonated deeply. I was learning that leadership was about stewardship, not accumulation, about serving my team, not using them to advance my career, about making decisions that were good for the whole, not just good for me. After the service, a guy I'd never met approached me. "Hi, I'm Matt. I heard you share your testimony a few months ago and it really impacted me. I'm going through job loss right now. Got laid off 3 weeks ago. Would you be willing to meet for coffee sometime? I could use some encouragement from someone who's been through it." "Absolutely. Here's my number." Over the next few weeks, I met with Matt regularly, walked him through the job search process, connected him with resources, shared what I'd learned about trusting God through uncertainty. And I realized this was part of why I'd gone through what I'd gone through. Not just for my own growth, but to help others navigate similar struggles. "You're so calm about all this," Matt said during one of our coffee meetings. "How do you not panic when everything feels uncertain?" "I do panic sometimes, but I've learned that panic doesn't prevent problems. It just prevents me from seeing what God's doing. I've been where you are. I know how terrifying it is, but I also know that God was faithful to me through it, and He'll be faithful to you too. What if I don't find a job? What if I lose everything like you did? Then you'll discover what I discovered, that losing everything externally doesn't mean losing what actually matters. Your worth, your identity, your purpose, those things can't be taken away by job loss. They come from God, not from your circumstances. In April, Rachel came to me with news. I got offered a position at another company. It's a senior analyst role, more money, more responsibility. But I don't know if I should take it. Tell me about the opportunity. She described it. Good company, solid role, significant pay increase. But I've learned so much here, and I feel like I'm finally building my life on the right foundation. I'm worried that leaving would be about chasing money and status again. Or, I said, maybe it's a legitimate opportunity and God is opening a new door for you. The question isn't whether advancement is wrong. It's whether you're seeking it for the right reasons. Are you running toward something or running from something? Running toward, I think. This role would let me use my skills in new ways, and the company's mission actually aligns with what I care about. Then maybe you should take it. Growth isn't betraying what you've learned. It's applying what you've learned in new contexts. She decided to accept the offer, and I was genuinely happy for her. Watching her journey over the past 6 months, from anxious and driven to grounded and purposeful, had been one of the unexpected joys of leadership. At the next men's group, I shared about the challenges of the new role, the pay cut, the pressure, the weight of making decisions that affected people's livelihoods. How do you handle that? Miguel asked. The responsibility? By remembering it's not all on me. I do my best, I seek wisdom, I make the most informed decisions I can. But the outcomes are ultimately in God's hands, not mine. My job is to be faithful, not to be perfect. Chris added, that's maturity right there. A year ago, you would have tried to control everything, would have made the responsibility all about proving yourself. Now you're learning to lead from a place of trust rather than fear. I still have moments where I slip into that, where I start thinking my worth is tied to whether I make the right call or whether the company succeeds. But I recognize it faster now, and I have you guys to call me out when I'm falling into old patterns. By May, Nexus had secured 2 new major clients, replacing the revenue we'd lost and then some. The pay cuts were reversed. The crisis had been navigated successfully, and I'd learned that leadership wasn't about preventing every crisis. It was about stewarding well through inevitable crises. One evening, I was at my apartment reflecting on the past 18 months. From unemployed and desperate to director of finance, from sleeping on a mattress on the floor to leading a team, from convinced I'd lost everything to discovering what couldn't be lost. The journey had been so much more than career recovery. It had been transformation, not just in circumstances, but in how I saw the world, saw myself, saw God. I'd learned that trust wasn't passive. It was active engagement with faith rather than fear. That security wasn't found in what I could control, but in who I could trust. That success without foundation was fragile, but foundation without success was still solid. You will not lose anything if you trust in me. Those words, spoken to me in my darkest moment, had proven true through every season since. Through crisis and recovery, through unemployment and promotion, through loss and restoration, they'd held up under testing, they'd proven reliable in practice, and I believed they'd keep proving true for whatever came next. Because they weren't about guaranteeing easy circumstances, they were about guaranteeing an unshakable foundation, about promise that what mattered most, identity, worth, purpose, peace, those things came from God and couldn't be taken by circumstances. I'd lost a job, but I'd gained a vocation, using my work to serve others and glorify God. I'd lost financial security, but I'd gained faith, trusting God's provision rather than my own planning. I'd lost a relationship, but I'd gained community, real, authentic relationships built on vulnerability. I'd lost my self-sufficiency, but I'd gained dependence on God, which turned out to be the most secure place to stand. 18 months since the night everything changed, and I was still learning, still growing, still discovering new depths to what those words meant, still learning to trust, still learning to lead, still learning to live with open hands, still discovering that what I couldn't lose was infinitely more valuable than what I could. Summer came, bringing with it a new season both literally and figuratively. I'd been director of finance at Nexus for 4 months now, and the role had stretched me in ways I hadn't anticipated, not just professionally, but personally and spiritually. One Saturday morning in June, I was at a men's retreat that Grace Community organized, 2 days at a camp in the mountains, focused on spiritual growth and authentic community. About 30 guys attended, including Chris, Miguel, Jason, and several others from the weekly group. Saturday evening, we broke into smaller discussion groups. Our prompt was, "What has God been teaching you this year?" When it came to my turn, I paused, trying to find words for something I was still learning. I think God's been teaching me about stewardship versus ownership. For most of my life, I treated everything I had as mine, my career, my money, my plans, my future, And when I lost those things, I felt like I'd lost everything. But now I'm learning that I never actually owned any of it. I was just stewarding it temporarily, and that changes how I hold everything, with open hands instead of clenched fists. Chris nodded. That's profound. What does that look like practically? It means I can work hard at my job without making it my identity. I can enjoy my salary without finding security in my bank account. I can make plans for the future without demanding that the future goes according to my plans. It means recognizing that everything, my work, my resources, my opportunities, even my life itself, all of it is on loan from God. And my job is to steward it well, not to possess it tightly. Another guy in the group, someone I didn't know well named David, spoke up. I needed to hear that. I've been struggling because my wife and I are trying to have kids, and it's not happening. And I keep feeling like God is withholding something from me that I deserve. But maybe the question isn't, why won't God give me what I want? But am I trusting God even when He doesn't give me what I want? The conversation deepened from there. Men sharing honestly about struggles with infertility, career disappointments, financial stress, relationship tensions. And through it all, the theme kept emerging. Trust isn't about getting what we want. It's about believing God is good even when we don't get what we want. That night, lying in my bunk in the cabin, I reflected on how far I'd come. 2 years ago, I would have been threatened by that conversation. I would have needed to have all the answers, to project confidence, to hide any weakness. But now I could be honest about still learning, still struggling, still figuring it out, and that honesty created connection rather than distance. When I got back to the city Sunday evening, there was a voicemail from a number I didn't recognize. I listened to it as I unpacked. Hi Daniel, this is Amanda. I know it's been a while since we talked, but I heard through mutual friends that you're doing well and I wanted to, I don't know, maybe we could get coffee sometime? I'd like to catch up if you're open to it. My first reaction was surprise. It had been over a year since we'd broken up. Nearly a year since I'd called to apologize. I'd assumed that chapter was completely closed. But hearing her voice brought back memories, both good and painful. I called Chris before responding. Amanda called. Wants to meet for coffee. I don't know if that's a good idea. Why not? Because I'm finally in a good place. I don't want to reopen old wounds. Or maybe she's reaching out because she's processing her own stuff and needs closure. Or maybe you both need to have a conversation that wasn't possible a year ago. I don't think you should avoid it out of fear. What if she wants to get back together? Do you want to get back together? I thought about it. I don't know. I loved her. I probably still have feelings for her. But I'm also different now. And I don't know if we'd work together given how much I've changed. Then go to coffee, be honest, and see what the conversation reveals. You're not that desperate, unemployed guy anymore. You're not trying to hide or pretend. You can just be present and see what emerges. I texted Amanda back, hey, good to hear from you. I'm open to coffee. When works for you? We met Thursday evening at the same cafe where we'd had our last conversation as a couple over a year ago. She looked good, put together, healthy, less stressed than I remembered her being near the end of our relationship. Thanks for meeting me, she said after we ordered. I wasn't sure if you'd be willing. Of course. How are you doing? Good. Really good, actually. I've been in therapy, which has been helpful, working through some stuff, and part of that process has been reflecting on our relationship and how it ended. Okay. I wanted to say I'm sorry for how I handled things when you lost your job. I wasn't patient. I didn't understand what you were going through. I made it about me when you were drowning, and I'm sorry for that. Her words surprised me. Amanda, you don't need to apologize. You were right to leave when you did. I was impossible to be in relationship with. I was consumed by unemployment and couldn't give you what you needed. Maybe. But I also could have been more supportive. I could have fought for us instead of just walking away. Or maybe the relationship needed to end so we could both grow in ways we wouldn't have grown together. I'm not saying it wasn't painful, but looking back, I can see how God used that loss, along with all the other losses, to reshape me into someone different, someone better. We talked for 2 hours. about what had happened in the year since we'd last spoken, her new relationship, which had ended after 6 months, my journey through faith, through unemployment, through recovery, the ways we'd both changed. "You seem different," she said. "More grounded, less anxious." "I am different. Losing everything was the worst thing that ever happened to me, and also, in some ways, the best thing. Because it forced me to build my life on something other than circumstances, on something that couldn't be taken away. I'm happy for you, Daniel. Really happy. You've clearly found something I'm still looking for." "What are you looking for?" "I don't know exactly. Purpose, peace, something that makes sense of everything. I've achieved what I thought I wanted. Good career, nice apartment, financial security. But it feels empty, like there should be more." I recognize that feeling. I'd felt it myself before everything fell apart. Can I tell you something? That emptiness was probably what led me to pray that night when I was about to be evicted. When everything else was stripped away, I finally got desperate enough to reach out to God. And He met me there. Do you really believe that? That God is real and cares about us? I do. Not because I can prove it logically, but because I've experienced it. I've felt His presence. I've heard His voice. I've seen His faithfulness. And once you've experienced that, you can't unknow it. Amanda was quiet for a moment. Maybe that's what I need, my own crisis to drive me to something real. You don't have to wait for a crisis. You can just be honest about the emptiness and ask God to fill it. That's all I did. I got to the end of myself and said, "I need help." And He answered. Before we left, I asked, "Why did you really reach out, Amanda? What were you hoping for?" "Honestly, I think I was hoping maybe we could try again, that enough time had passed that we could make it work. But talking to you now, I realize we're on different paths. You found something I haven't found yet, and until I find it, I don't think I'm ready for any relationship. I think that's wise, and for what it's worth, I hope you do find it. I hope you find what I found, not because you have to lose everything like I did, but because you choose to seek it." Walking to my car after we said goodbye, I felt an unexpected peace. The conversation had been good, honest, mature, free from resentment or regret. We'd both been able to acknowledge what was and what wasn't, without needing to force something that wasn't meant to be. "You will not lose anything if you trust in me." I'd lost Amanda. Lost the relationship, the future we'd planned, the life we might have built together. But in losing her, I hadn't lost my capacity to love, to be vulnerable, to hope for relationship in the future. Those things remained, untouched by the loss. The next Sunday, Pastor James preached about the rich young ruler again, but this time focusing on what happened after the man walked away. Jesus loved him, Pastor James said. The text tells us that, but Jesus didn't chase him, didn't try to negotiate. Didn't make the ask easier, because sometimes love means letting people walk away when they're not ready to receive what you're offering. He paused. And here's what we miss. Jesus' offer wasn't to take something from that man. It was to give him something infinitely more valuable than what he'd be releasing. But the man couldn't see it because his hands were too full. He was clinging so tightly to what he had that he couldn't receive what was being offered. After the service, I found myself in conversation with a woman I'd seen around church but never really talked to. Her name was Jennifer, and she'd recently started attending Grace Community. "I really appreciated your testimony when you shared it a few months ago," she said. "I'm going through my own season of loss right now. Divorce after 15 years of marriage, and I keep wondering if I'm being punished or if God is trying to teach me something." "Can I ask, what do you think He's trying to teach you?" "I don't know. Maybe that I made my husband my God, that I found my identity in being married instead of in being God's daughter. I'm still figuring it out." "That sounds really wise, actually. Sometimes the hardest losses are the ones that reveal what we'd been worshipping without realizing it. Not that your marriage was bad, but maybe it had become more central than it was meant to be." We talked for another 20 minutes about loss and identity, about finding worth in the right place, about trusting God through unwanted transitions. Before she left, she asked, "Is there a support group or something for people going through this kind of thing?" I don't think there's a formal divorce support group, but there's definitely community here for people in hard seasons. And honestly, that's what saved me, having people who understood struggle and were willing to walk through it with me. That week, I talked to Pastor James about starting a support group for people navigating major life transitions, job loss, divorce, illness, death of loved ones, any significant loss. He thought it was a great idea and asked if I'd be willing to co-lead it with one of the pastoral staff. "You have credibility here that most people don't," he said. "You've been through it. You've done the work. You've let God transform you through it. That's exactly what people need. Someone who's ahead of them on the path, but not so far ahead that they can't relate." The first meeting of the new group happened 2 weeks later. 12 people showed up, people dealing with job loss, divorce, death of parents, chronic illness, bankruptcy, each one carrying their own version of loss, their own questions about whether God was still good when life was hard. I started the meeting by sharing my own story, not just the highlights, but the raw parts, the desperation, the shame, the moments I wanted to give up, and then the slowly growing trust, the unexpected provisions, the transformation that happened not in spite of the loss, but through it. "I'm not going to tell you that everything will work out exactly how you want," I said. "I'm not going to promise that God will restore everything you've lost. But I will tell you this. What you're most afraid of losing probably isn't what matters most anyway, and what God wants to give you, presence, peace, purpose, unshakable foundation, that's something no crisis can take away." The conversation that followed was honest and raw, people sharing fears, questions, doubts, and other people responding not with platitudes but with presence, not with answers but with "me too," not with solutions but with solidarity. This was church. Not the songs or the sermons, though those mattered, but this. People being honest about struggle and other people refusing to let them struggle alone. This was what community was supposed to be. After the meeting, Jennifer came up to me. "Thank you for creating this space. For the first time since my divorce, I don't feel completely alone." "You're not alone. None of us are." That's what I had to learn the hard way. Walking to my car that night, I thought about the past 2 years. How God had taken my greatest loss and used it to create something redemptive. How my pain had become a bridge to help others navigate their own pain. How the very thing I'd been most ashamed of, my failure, my breakdown, my desperation, had become the foundation for ministry. "You will not lose anything if you trust in me." I'd lost a career, but I'd gained a calling, using my story to help others trust God through their own stories. I'd lost a relationship, but I'd gained compassion, understanding what it means to love and lose and heal. I'd lost my self-sufficiency, but I'd gained community, the gift of both receiving and giving support. I'd lost control, but I'd gained trust, a foundation that held regardless of circumstances. 2 years since the night everything changed, and I was still discovering new layers of what those words meant, still learning to trust, still learning to lead, still learning to steward rather than possess, still discovering that what I couldn't lose was infinitely more valuable than anything I'd lost along the way. Fall arrived, marking 2.5 years since that desperate prayer on my balcony. The Life Transition Support Group had grown from 12 people to nearly 30, meeting weekly at the church. We'd added a second facilitator, Jennifer, the woman going through divorce, who'd found such healing in the group that she wanted to help others navigate similar journeys. At work, Nexus was thriving. We doubled our revenue from the previous year, expanded to 2 new markets, and were being courted by several venture capital firms for a Series C funding round. My role as Director of Finance meant I was deeply involved in all these conversations, modeling financial projections, advising on strategic decisions. One October morning, James called me into his office. "Daniel, close the door. I want to run something by you." I sat down, curious. James had a way of being simultaneously casual and serious that kept you guessing whether the conversation would be good news or challenging news. "We've had some preliminary conversations with a potential acquirer," he said. "Tech giant, household name, interested in buying Nexus outright. The terms they're floating are substantial, life-changing money for all of us, especially leadership." My heart rate picked up. "How substantial? If the deal goes through, your equity stake would be worth about $500,000. Plus, they want to retain key leadership, so there'd be retention bonuses and a significant salary increase." I stared at him, trying to process. $500,000. From someone who'd been homeless adjacent 2 years ago to potentially having that kind of wealth. It felt surreal. "What's the timeline?" I asked. "Exploratory conversations are happening now. If both sides remain interested, due diligence would take 3 to 4 months, closing another 2 months after that. So we're looking at maybe 6 months total if everything aligns." "And what happens to the team? To our culture? To the mission we've been building toward?" James smiled. "That's exactly the right question to ask. And honestly, I don't know yet. That's part of what we'll be negotiating. But I wanted to give you a heads up since this would significantly impact you." After the meeting, I went for a walk around the block trying to process $500,000, financial security beyond anything I'd imagined, the ability to pay off any remaining debt, help my parents save for the future, give generously. It was an answer to prayers I hadn't even known to pray, but underneath the excitement was something else, a small voice of caution, not anxiety, but discernment. A question: will this money become your new God? Will you trust it more than you trust me? I called Chris. "I need to talk. Can we meet for lunch?" Over sandwiches, I told him about the potential acquisition. His eyes widened. "Daniel, that's incredible. That's life-changing money. I know, and I'm grateful, but I'm also, I don't know, cautious. Like, I fought so hard to learn that my security doesn't come from money or success, and now I'm about to get a lot of both. How do I receive that blessing without making it my foundation again? That's wisdom, man. Most people wouldn't even ask that question. They'd just take the money and run. The fact that you're thinking about it means you've actually learned something. So what do I do? You receive it with gratitude and hold it with open hands. You enjoy it without worshipping it. You use it generously without finding identity in it. You remember that money can be lost just as easily as it can be gained. And you keep your foundation on the thing that can't be taken away. We talked for an hour about stewardship, about wealth, about the responsibilities that come with resources, about how to bless others without becoming paternalistic, about how to enjoy good things without making them ultimate things. "And Daniel," Chris said as we were leaving, "remember this, the money isn't the point. God's been taking you on a journey of learning to trust Him. This is just another chapter in that journey, another opportunity to practice what you've learned." That Sunday, Pastor James, as if he'd somehow known what I needed to hear, preached about the rich man and Lazarus from Luke 16. Not about the afterlife, but about what wealth does to our hearts if we're not careful. Wealth isn't inherently evil, he said, but it's dangerous. It tempts us to trust in our resources instead of trusting in God. It can insulate us from dependence. It can make us think we're self-sufficient. And worst of all, it can blind us to the needs around us. He paused, looking out at the congregation. If God blesses you with wealth, the question isn't, did I earn this? It's, what does God want me to do with this? Every resource you have is on loan from God. Your job isn't to hoard it or to use it to secure your own future. Your job is to steward it for His purposes. After the service, I found Pastor James. "Can we talk? I have something I need to process." In his office, I told him about the potential acquisition and the financial implications. "I'm grateful," I said, "but I'm also scared. Scared I'll fall back into trusting money instead of trusting God. That's a healthy fear. But let me ask you this. Do you trust God more now than you did 2 years ago?" "Absolutely." "And has that trust been built on circumstances or on God's character?" "On His character." Because circumstances have been all over the place, terrible, then better, then challenging in new ways, but He's been faithful through all of it. then this money can't take away what you've learned, unless you let it. The question is, will you use it as a tool for God's purposes, or will you let it become your master? We talked about practical steps, giving generously, immediately, and significantly, setting aside money for future giving rather than just spending on myself, living below my means, regardless of how much I made, staying connected to community, especially people whose financial situations were different from mine, regularly examining my heart for signs that money was becoming an idol. And Daniel, Pastor James said, if this deal happens, I'd like you to consider increasing your financial support of the church. Not because we need your money, though we're always grateful for generosity, but because giving reminds you that everything you have comes from God and belongs to God. At the next Life Transitions group meeting, I was vulnerable about my own current transition. I might be coming into significant money soon through a business deal, and I'm wrestling with how to handle it well, how to receive blessing without making it my security, how to enjoy it without worshipping it. The responses were revealing. Some people celebrated with me, genuinely happy for the blessing. Others struggled with envy. They were in financial crisis while I was about to receive abundance. I understood both reactions. I'd been in both places. Jennifer spoke up. I think what you're doing, being honest about the struggle of receiving blessing, that's really important. We talk a lot in this group about handling loss, but we also need to talk about handling gain, because both can be challenging in different ways. A man named Robert going through bankruptcy said, honestly, it's hard to hear. I'm happy for you, but I'm also angry. Where's my blessing? Where's my breakthrough? I've been trusting God for months and nothing's changing. I appreciated his honesty. Robert, I get that. 2 years ago, I would have felt exactly the same way. And I don't have an answer for why some people's circumstances improve quickly and others wait much longer. But I can tell you this. My circumstances improving doesn't mean I trust God more than you do. It just means I'm in a different season. Trust isn't measured by circumstances. It's measured by how we respond to whatever circumstances we're in. The conversation continued. Messy, honest, real. This was the beauty and difficulty of community. We couldn't pretend everything was equal or fair. We had to hold tension, celebrating with those who were celebrating while mourning with those who were mourning, and trusting that God was working in all of it, even when it didn't look the way we thought it should. November came, and with it, Thanksgiving. My family gathered at my parents' house again. Me, Alex and his family, my parents, extended relatives. As we went around sharing what we were grateful for, I felt the weight of the past 2 years settle into something like wisdom. 2 years ago, I said, I was in the darkest place I'd ever been. No job, no money, no hope, and I would have given anything to skip that season, to avoid that pain. But sitting here now, I'm actually grateful for it. Not because it was fun, it was awful, but because it taught me things I couldn't have learned any other way. It taught me what I couldn't lose, and that changed everything. My mom had tears in her eyes. My dad squeezed my shoulder. Alex said, "You've taught all of us something, you know, about faith, about resilience, about what really matters." In December, the acquisition talks intensified. Due diligence began in earnest. The acquirer's team examining every aspect of Nexus's business, finances, operations. My days were filled with meetings, document preparation, answering questions, modeling scenarios. The work was intense, but I maintained my boundaries. Still left by 7 p.m. most nights, still kept Sundays sacred, still attended men's group and co-led the transitions group because I'd learned that success without foundation was hollow. That achievement without spiritual health was empty. One evening, Sarah, my former boss who'd moved to the COO role at another startup, called me. "Daniel, I heard about the potential acquisition. That's huge. Congratulations." "Thanks. It's still not certain, but it's looking likely." "Doc, can I tell you something? When I recommended you for the director position, some people questioned it. They thought you were too new, too inexperienced. But I knew something they didn't. You'd been through fire, you'd lost everything and rebuilt. And people who've been through that, they have perspective that people who've only known success don't have. I'm grateful you took that chance on me. I'm grateful you proved me right. And Daniel, don't lose that perspective when the money comes. Don't forget what you learned when you had nothing. That's your superpower. Christmas week, James pulled the leadership team into a meeting. The deal is moving forward. Barring any surprises in the final negotiations, we expect to close in late January. This is really happening. The room erupted in celebration. Hugs, high fives, tears of joy. Years of hard work were about to pay off in a significant, life-changing way. But as I joined the celebration, I noticed something. I was happy, genuinely happy. But I wasn't finding my identity in the success. I wasn't feeling like this vindicated me or proved my worth. It was just good news, a blessing, something to be grateful for without being defined by. That night, I sat on my balcony, the same balcony where 2 years ago I'd prayed that desperate prayer, the same spot where God had spoken words that would reshape my entire life. You will not lose anything if you trust in me. I thought about everything that had happened since then, the job offer at Nexus, the recovery of financial stability, the promotion to director, the growth of the support group ministry, the relationships built and healed, the transformation of my entire foundation, and now, potentially, significant wealth coming my way. You will not lose anything if you trust in me. Those words had proven true through every season, through loss and gain, through crisis and stability, through poverty and approaching prosperity. They'd held up under testing. They'd proven reliable in practice, and I believed they'd keep proving true for whatever came next, because they weren't about guaranteeing easy circumstances or promising wealth or ensuring that life would always go well. They were about something deeper, about building life on a foundation that circumstances couldn't shake, about finding security in God's character rather than in my situation, about discovering that what I couldn't lose was infinitely more valuable than anything I could lose or gain. The money would come, probably, and I'd steward it well. I was committed to that. I'd give generously, save wisely, enjoy gratefully, and hold it all with open hands. But the money wouldn't be my foundation, success wouldn't be my security, wealth wouldn't be my God, because I'd learned through the hardest season of my life what could and couldn't be taken away. And I'd learned that the things that couldn't be taken away, faith, community, purpose, God's presence, those were the things that actually mattered. Everything else was just circumstance. Sometimes good circumstance, sometimes bad circumstance, but just circumstance. And I was learning to trust the God who remained faithful through every circumstance, who'd met me in my lowest moment and was still meeting me in my highest moments, who'd spoken words of truth when I was drowning and continued speaking truth when I was thriving. You will not lose anything if you trust in me. 2.5 years later, those words were more true than ever. And I was still learning, still growing, still discovering new depths to what trust actually meant, still learning to live with open hands, still learning to steward rather than possess, still learning that every gain was an opportunity to practice what I'd learned through loss, still discovering that what I couldn't lose was the only thing worth building my life on. The acquisition closed on January 28th, 3 years almost to the day since that night on my balcony when I'd prayed in desperation and God had spoken those life-altering words, "You will not lose anything if you trust in me." I sat in the conference room at Nexus as we signed the final documents, watched the wire transfers go through, and officially became part of a Fortune 500 company. My bank account suddenly showed numbers I'd never imagined seeing. After taxes and careful planning, I had just over $400,000 in liquid assets, plus the new salary, $130,000 annually, and retention bonus structured over 3 years. From homeless adjacent to this in 3 years. The team celebrated with champagne and congratulations. There were tears, laughter, disbelief at what we'd built and what it had become. James gave a speech about the journey, about how proud he was of everyone, about the new opportunities ahead. But as I drove home that evening, I felt something unexpected. Not euphoria, but quiet gratitude. Not anxiety about what to do with the money, but peace about already knowing. Not a sense that I'd arrived, but awareness that this was just another chapter in an ongoing story. I went straight to my balcony, the same spot where everything had changed 3 years ago. And I prayed, not a prayer of desperation this time, but a prayer of stewardship. God, thank you, not just for the money, though I'm grateful for it, but thank you for the journey that got me here. Thank you for meeting me when I had nothing. Thank you for teaching me what couldn't be taken away. Thank you for proving faithful through every season, the terrible ones and the good ones. And now, help me steward this well. Help me use it for your purposes. Help me hold it with open hands. Help me never forget what you taught me when I had nothing. The next morning, before I told anyone else about the closing, I made my first decision about the money. I transferred $50,000 to Grace Community Church, a tithe of my windfall, plus some additional generosity. Then I sent $10,000 to the homeless shelter where I'd volunteered a few times. Another $10,000 to a job placement nonprofit that helped people transition from unemployment. It felt right. Not because I was trying to earn God's favor, I'd learned that was backwards theology, but because giving reminded me that it was all His anyway, that I was just a steward, not an owner, that generosity was worship, not obligation. At church that Sunday, I asked Pastor James if I could share briefly during announcements. He agreed, curious about what I wanted to say. I stood on stage, looked out at the congregation that had become family, and told them about the journey's latest chapter. 3 years ago, I stood in my empty apartment with an eviction notice, convinced I was about to lose everything, and in desperation, I prayed for the first time in years, and God spoke to me. He said, "You will not lose anything if you trust in me." And I didn't understand what He meant, because I was actively losing everything. And I paused, seeing faces throughout the room. Chris and his family, Jennifer, Matt, who I'd mentored through his own job loss, Robert from the support group who was still waiting for his breakthrough, so many others whose stories had intersected with mine. But over the past 3 years, God has taught me what He meant. He wasn't saying my circumstances wouldn't change or that I wouldn't face loss. He was saying that what matters most, my identity, my worth, my purpose, my security, those things come from Him and can't be taken away by circumstances. And that's proven true through unemployment and employment, through poverty and now prosperity, through loss and gain. I took a breath. This past week, the company I work for was acquired, and I'm now in a position to be financially generous in ways I never imagined. So I want you to know, I've made a significant gift to this church because you were the community that walked with me through my darkest season. You reminded me I wasn't alone. You taught me what trust actually looks like, and I'm grateful. After the service, dozens of people came up, some to celebrate, some to share their own stories of God's provision, some to ask for advice about trusting God through their current struggles. Robert pulled me aside, tears in his eyes. "I've been wrestling with envy since you shared about the potential deal back in the fall. But hearing you today, how you're giving immediately, how you're not finding identity in the money, it helps. It reminds me that blessing isn't about circumstances. It's about what God does in us through every circumstance. Keep trusting, Robert. Your breakthrough will come. Maybe not in the form you expect, but it'll come. God's been faithful to you even when it doesn't feel like it." So, over the next few months, I established a rhythm of stewardship. I met with a Christian financial advisor who helped me create a giving plan, investment strategy, and budget that aligned with my values. I set up an emergency fund, maxed out retirement contributions, and established a foundation for long-term giving to causes I cared about. But I also made sure to enjoy some of it. I bought a nice car, not extravagant, but reliable and comfortable. I traveled to visit my grandmother, who I hadn't seen in years. I took my parents out to nice dinners and paid off the small mortgage they still had on their house. I helped Alex and his family with a down payment on a bigger home. Generosity felt better than accumulation. Blessing others felt more satisfying than collecting things. Using money as a tool rather than a treasure felt like freedom. At work, the transition to being part of the larger company brought new challenges. New processes, new bureaucracy, new bosses who didn't know our culture. Some of the original Nexus teams struggled with the changes. A few left for other opportunities. But I'd learned something through the past 3 years. Everything changes. Jobs change. Companies change. Circumstances change. The only constant was God's faithfulness. And that foundation held regardless of what happened externally. One afternoon in April, Matt, the guy I'd been mentoring who'd found a job several months ago, called me. "Daniel, I need to tell you something. I just got laid off. The company's doing another round of cuts and I'm out." My heart sank for him. "I'm so sorry, Matt. How are you doing?" "Honestly, I'm scared. But I'm also, I don't know, I'm not panicking like I would have a year ago. Because you taught me that job loss doesn't mean losing what actually matters. That God's still faithful even when circumstances aren't what we want." "That's exactly right. And Matt, you're not alone in this. I'm here. The church community is here. We'll walk through this with you." "Thanks, man. I needed to hear that." After we hung up, I felt the weight of it. Matt's loss was real. His fear was legitimate. But he had something I hadn't had 3 years ago when I lost my job. He had community immediately. He had a foundation of trust already established. He had tools for navigating uncertainty. That was the gift of what I'd learned. Not just for me, but for everyone my story touched. The pain I'd been through hadn't been wasted. It had been transformed into something redemptive that could help others. In June, Jennifer from the support group came to me with news. "Daniel, I wanted you to hear this from me first. I'm leaving the group, not because I don't need community, I always will, but because I'm in a different place now. The divorce is final, I've processed a lot of the grief, and I'm actually excited about the future for the first time in 2 years. That's wonderful, Jennifer. I'm so happy for you. And I've been thinking, I want to start a group for people specifically going through divorce. Using what I've learned, helping others the way you helped me. Would you support that?" "Absolutely. Let me connect you with Pastor James. I think it's a great idea." Watching people like Jennifer and Matt and so many others take what they'd learned through loss and use it to help others, that was the fullest expression of redemption. God taking our worst moments and weaving them into something beautiful that served others. The Life Transition Support Group continued growing. We were now running 3 groups weekly to accommodate everyone who wanted to participate. The church hired a part-time staff person to coordinate it all. What had started as 12 people sitting in a circle sharing their struggles had become a full ministry reaching hundreds. One evening in July, I was having dinner with Chris and Lauren. Their kids were with Lauren's parents for the weekend, so it was just the 3 of us at their favorite Mexican restaurant. "Can I ask you something?" Chris said. "What's different now versus 3 years ago, beyond the obvious circumstantial stuff?" I thought about it. 3 years ago, I was trying to control everything. I thought security came from having the right job, the right salary, the right plan. I thought if I just worked hard enough and planned well enough, I could guarantee good outcomes. And when that fell apart, I fell apart because my whole foundation crumbled. I paused, gathering my thoughts. Now, I know I can't control outcomes. I can't guarantee circumstances, but I can trust the God who's in control. I can build my life on something that circumstances can't shake. I can work hard without finding identity in work. I can have money without making money my God. I can make plans without demanding that plans work out exactly how I want. Lauren smiled. That's wisdom, real wisdom, the kind that only comes through experience. And pain, I added. Don't forget the pain. I wouldn't have learned any of this without going through hell first. Would you go back and change it if you could? Chris asked. Would you skip the unemployment, the eviction, all of it? No, I wouldn't. Which is crazy to say, but it's true. I'm a different person because of that season. A better person, more compassionate, more dependent on God, more grateful, more generous. The Daniel who had everything figured out 3 years ago, that guy was a mess even though he didn't know it. He was building his life on sand, and it needed to crumble so he could rebuild on rock. August brought unexpected news. Amanda reached out again, this time with different news. Daniel, I wanted to tell you something. I've started going to church, and I've been meeting with a counselor, working through a lot of stuff, and I wanted to thank you for that conversation we had last year when you told me about your faith journey. It planted seeds that have been growing. Amanda, that's amazing. I'm so happy for you. I'm not where you are yet. I'm still figuring it all out, but I'm learning what you tried to tell me, that there's something more than just career success and relationship status and financial security, that there's a foundation that actually holds. We talked for an hour about her journey, about the questions she was wrestling with, about what it meant to trust God when you'd spent your whole life trusting yourself. And I got to encourage her the same way others had encouraged me, not with answers, but with presence, not with certainty, but with hope. In September, I made a decision I'd been thinking about for months. I enrolled in seminary part-time, not to become a pastor, but to deepen my understanding of theology, to study Scripture more seriously, to equip myself better for the ministry work I was doing through the support groups. You don't need a degree to do ministry, Pastor James said when I told him, but I think it's wise. Education in service of calling, that's powerful. At my 3-year work anniversary at Nexus, now a subsidiary of the larger company, James took me out for lunch. Daniel, I want to tell you something. When we hired you 3 years ago on that contract position, I had doubts. You'd been unemployed for 6 months. You seemed, I don't know, fragile, like you might break under pressure. I probably was fragile, I admitted, but you've proven to be one of our strongest hires, not despite what you went through, but because of it. You have perspective that most people lack. You don't panic when things get hard because you've been through harder. You lead from a place of wisdom that only comes from experience. I'm grateful we took a chance on you. I'm grateful you did too. This place gave me more than just a job. It gave me a chance to rebuild. That evening, I sat on my balcony one more time. 3 years to the day since that desperate prayer. 3 years since God had spoken words that would reshape everything. You will not lose anything if you trust in me. I thought about everything I'd lost over the past 3 years. A job, an apartment, a relationship, financial security, my carefully constructed image of having life figured out, my self-sufficiency, my belief that I could control outcomes. And I thought about everything I'd gained: faith, community, purpose, peace, wisdom, compassion, a vocation rather than just a career, relationships built on authenticity rather than performance, freedom from needing circumstances to be perfect, security that didn't depend on my bank account. What I'd gained was infinitely more valuable than what I'd lost. The words God spoke 3 years ago had proven true through every season. Through crisis and recovery, through unemployment and promotion, through poverty and prosperity, through loss and restoration, they'd held up under testing, they'd proven reliable in practice, and they'd keep proving true for whatever came next, because they weren't about circumstances, they were about foundation. They weren't about guaranteeing easy outcomes, they were about guaranteeing God's presence regardless of outcomes. You will not lose anything if you trust in me. My name is Daniel. 3 years ago, I lost everything and discovered what couldn't be lost. I learned that trust isn't passive, it's active choice after active choice. I learned that security doesn't come from controlling circumstances, but from trusting the God who holds circumstances. I learned that what matters most can never be taken away. And if you're reading this, if you're in your own season of loss right now, I want you to know you're not alone. What you're afraid of losing probably isn't what matters most anyway, and what God wants to give you, presence, peace, purpose, unshakable foundation, that's something no crisis can take away. Trust Him, not because it guarantees easy circumstances, but because He's faithful even when circumstances aren't. Trust Him, not because you'll never face loss, but because loss can't take away what He gives. Trust Him, not because you have it all figured out, but because He has it figured out. Trust Him, and discover that what you can't lose is the only thing worth building your life on. 3 years since God spoke to me. 3 years of learning what those words meant. 3 years of discovering that trust is the foundation everything else is built on, and I'm still learning, still trusting, still discovering new depths to what it means to live with open hands, still grateful for the journey, all of it, even the painful parts, because it taught me what couldn't be lost. And that changed everything.